Thank you so much. So hi all, it is 9 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome to the Southern California Regional Webinar. My name is Ashley Yee, and I'm CalRecycle's SB 1383 Implementation Manager. And before I turn it over to Julia Doloff, who will go over logistics for the webinar, I just wanted to introduce you all to those who will be presenting and are available to answer any questions. So from CalRecycle, if you just want to give a wave once I say your name. So from CalRecycle, we have Kyle Pogue and Martine Boswell representing edible food. We have Kara Morgan and Julia Doloff representing collections. And Julia also helped put together all of these webinars, so big thank you to her. We have Scott Beckner, Michelle Dewey, and Kristen Pidcock representing procurement. And then we have Alan Osorio and Trisha Moore representing compliance and enforcement. Also, I'd like to introduce Tracy Swanborn. She is with HF&H Consultants. As you guys know, HF&H helped manage the development of the 4 CalRecycle SB 1383 model tools. Tracy is also available to provide insight on how cities, counties, and JPAs across the state are tackling 1383 based on all of her experience in assisting the dozens of jurisdictions with their SB 1383 compliance needs. So thank you all for joining us again, and I will turn over to Julia to go over logistics.
All right, thank you so much, Ashley. So I'm going to pull up my screen one more time, so just give me a quick second here. All righty, so good morning, everyone. Today, each team is going to be providing a 10 to 20 minute overview presentation of the regulatory requirements for each topic. Afterwards, there will be a Q&A session in which CalRecycle staff will unmute participants to allow you to ask your questions over the webinar. Please use the instructions shown on the slide for the Q&A sessions. If you are watching the webinar via the Cali PA broadcast link, you may email your questions to the SLCP inbox. If you are using the GoToWebinar platform, please type your question into the question pane. Staff will unmute participants in the order that questions come in. And note that you will need to unmute yourself on your end when asked to by a CalRecycle staff person. And please state your affiliation before asking your question. We will try to get to as many different people as possible today. And CalRecycle staff may be responding to some questions in writing through the GoToWebinar question pane. So please be sure to review that pane every so often for those responses. And for those watching via the broadcast, we will verbalize some of these questions and responses for you to hear as well. Questions and comments regarding the merit of the regulations were responded to during the formal rulemaking period. So today we will be focusing on questions or clarifications regarding implementation and tools. If we do not get to your question today, we will follow up with you at a later date. So now I'm going to hand it off to Kyle Pogue and Martine Boswell to cover the Edible Food Recovery Program requirements.
Good morning, everybody. Julia, thank you for that. I'm excited to see it. Looks like we have close to 200 attendees on this webinar today, and I've been scanning the names. I recognize a few of them, but it's nice to meet the rest of you. And just want to say, we are here to help you understand the edible food regulations, available to answer questions, of course. But want to identify this has been a multi-year process to get to these final regulations that has included a lot of fantastic feedback from stakeholders. And I wanted you to know that we've received input from food recovery organizations and services, local governments, public health departments, environmental groups, and commercial edible food generators as we define them. And this is a culmination of that input. So really want to thank you all for that, for help in putting this together. And I think we have a really profound opportunity to do something good through these regulations. And so thank you for that. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Martine Boswell, who's going to walk you through this. And we're, again, happy to answer questions. And a big thank you and shout out to Martine and the rest of the team for all the work that's gone into this. So Martine, take it away.
Thanks, Kyle. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. In this presentation, we're really going to be giving a high-level overview of SB 1383's edible food recovery goal and the policy components that have been developed to help California achieve this goal. So as part of California's strategy to reduce short-lived climate pollutants, SB 1383 included a 20% edible food recovery goal. But what does that mean? Well, it's written in the law of SB 1383 that no less than 20% of currently disposed edible food must be recovered for human consumption by 2025. It was also written in the law that CalRecycle must adopt regulations intended to help achieve this statewide 20% edible food recovery goal. So I want to clarify a couple of things about this goal before we move into each of the policy components. First, this is not a goal for individual food facilities to arrange to have 20% of their surplus edible food be recovered. This is also not a goal for individual jurisdictions to achieve a 20% edible food recovery rate. Rather, this is a statewide goal that California must collectively achieve. So that 20% goal is really for California to achieve that. Now, I also want to bring your attention to one other thing. So you'll see for the organic waste disposal reduction targets, that's that 50% and 75% target. It says, if I can bring your attention to the 75% target, it says a 75% reduction in the statewide disposal of organic waste from a 2014 level by 2025. You'll see that it specifies, so it was specified in the law that 2014 would be the baseline year for those organic waste disposal reduction targets to be measured against. There was no baseline year specified in statute for the edible food recovery goal. As a result, CalRecycle will most likely be using data from our 2018 disposal facility-based waste characterization study to be used to help inform how we measure the edible food recovery goal for SB 1383. That study, for any of you who would like to take a look at it or are interested, separated food waste into 8 different material types based on the edibility of the food. We also, out of those 8 material types, we had 5 different material types that were potentially donatable food types. So really what that study did was it measured the amount of potentially donatable food that's disposed of in California. So again, most likely the baseline will be a 2018 year. However, those decisions on how the baseline will be measured are still being made. So I just wanted to clarify that. Next slide, please. So some of the key policies that I'm going to cover today. The first thing I'm actually going to talk about is how edible food is defined, because that's very important for us to really understand what that definition is as we're moving forward talking about these regulations. Next, I'm going to cover commercial edible food generators, or many of you would refer to them or know them as specific types of food donors. These are the entities that will have direct requirements placed on them where they will be required to arrange to have the maximum amount of their edible food that would otherwise be disposed be recovered for human consumption. And I will talk about each of these policies in more detail as I move through the subsequent components of this presentation. The next key policy I will discuss involves edible food recovery capacity planning, because this is really critical. We need to make sure that as more generators are required to donate their surplus, that we have the necessary capacity, infrastructure, and networks in place to make sure that that food is in fact being recovered and not being discarded. The third policy component involves jurisdiction edible food recovery programs. So jurisdictions will have direct requirements placed on them to implement a local food recovery program, also to help facilitate food recovery in their area. And finally, the last component I will discuss involves food recovery organizations and services. So if food recovery organizations and services do choose to participate in SB 1383, then those organizations and services that voluntarily choose to participate will have requirements placed on them to maintain records and also to report. Next slide, please. What does edible food mean? This is very important. Edible food is defined differently depending on who you're speaking to or what organization you are working with. But in the context of these regulations, edible food is defined as food intended for human consumption. This is very broad. So that's just the first part of the definition. There are other components that are also included in the regulation. So although edible food is very broadly defined as food intended for human consumption, we also specified in the definition that nothing in the regulations requires or authorizes the recovery of edible food that does not meet the food safety requirements of the California Retail Food Code. So this is absolutely critical. Food safety is imperative in all of this. Just because the food is intended for human consumption does not necessarily mean that it can be safely recovered. So not only does the food have to be intended for human consumption, but it also must meet all of the California Retail Food Code's food safety requirements in order for it to be donated safely. We also specified in the definition that edible food is not solid waste if it is recovered and not discarded. So I will repeat that again. Edible food is not solid waste if it is recovered and not discarded. This is very important. This is food. It is a material that is before the bin. And if it can go to its highest and best use of helping feed people in need, then it absolutely should. So very important to remember that if it can be recovered, it is not solid waste. So a little bit of context about the photos on this slide. The photo on the left was taken from one of CalRecycle's food waste prevention and rescue grantees. These were some of the recoveries that they were making from K through 12 schools. And for example's sake, we'll just say that you can see that none of the eggs are cracked, and we'll say that all of this food meets the Cal Code requirements for safe surplus food donation. Compare that, however, to the photo on the right. This is, again, for the hypothetical example, this is food that has been out on an unsupervised open buffet line where customers are able to serve themselves. Most county health departments in California would not allow for that kind of food to be recovered for human consumption. So we're just trying to show again, even though the food on the right is food intended for human consumption, it doesn't meet all of the California Retail Food Code food safety requirements and therefore would not be able to be donated. Next slide, please. So the first key policy component that I want to discuss involves commercial edible food generators. So who are they and what are their requirements? We've separated the generators into two tiers. Tier 1 commercial edible food generators will be required to begin complying starting January 1st, 2022. 2 years later, the Tier 2 generators will have to begin compliance beginning January 1st, 2024. We've separated the generators into two tiers for a couple of different reasons. The first reason involves just the amount of food available. Typically, the Tier 1 generators have larger amounts of surplus edible food available for food recovery on a routine basis compared to the Tier 2 generators. They also have types of food available for donation that we typically have networks and infrastructure in place to be able to recover. It's a lot of produce, fresh and frozen grocery, and non-perishable foods. So we have the infrastructure to be able to handle that and have an understanding how to recover it safely. And that's pretty widespread throughout the state. Whereas the Tier 2 generators, it's a little bit different. These are dealing with more of prepared foods and in many cases hot prepared foods. So there are more logistical challenges, capacity challenges, and also health and safety concerns around recovering that type of food. So we wanted to give the generators and jurisdictions an additional 2 years to prepare for compliance. So that way we are able to recover this food. Now we are seeing incredible work being done throughout the state that is focused on recovering, in particular, hot prepared foods, and they're doing a fantastic job at it. Many food recovery services are in that space. So that's been very impressive. We know that it can be done, but we also understand that it takes a lot of work if you don't have those organizations already operating in your area. And finally, the other reason why we separated them into two tiers is because the Tier 1 generators, Many of them already have food donation practices or programs in place. So this is not going to be as heavy a lift for them. Whereas the tier 2 generators, this might be new for some of them. So again, it was very important that we gave them an additional 2 years to prepare. Next slide, please. So the key requirements for these generators, what is it? These generators are required to arrange to have the maximum amount of their edible food that would otherwise be disposed be recovered for human consumption. And they must comply with this requirement through a contract or written agreement with one or both of the following scenarios. A contract or written agreement where the food recovery organization or service will come and collect the food directly from the generator, or a contract or written agreement that specifies that the generator can self-haul their edible food to a food recovery organization. We added in that self-haul language specifically at the request of the California Association of Food Banks. They don't always have the resources to be able to go and recover this food. They don't have the drivers necessary to be able to do this with every single generator that would be mandated to comply. So at their request, they said this would be very helpful if you included that as an option for generators. Now, with that said, I want to be very clear that under no circumstances should a commercial edible food generator be self-hauling edible food to a food recovery organization that they don't have a contract or written agreement with. They can only self-haul edible food to a food recovery organization if they have a contract or written agreement with that organization, and that contract or written agreement specifies that they can self-haul food, and then they are meeting those specifications. So there's probably going to be a specified delivery date or delivery days and times, things like that. But what's really important, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, is that although there's a requirement to have a contract or written agreement, CalRecycle and SB 1383's regulations are silent on what needs to be included in that contract or written agreement. It is at the discretion of the generator and the food recovery organization or service that they're working with to determine what provisions they would include in that contract or written agreement, really to help meet their specific needs. Next slide, please. So to help with compliance, CalRecycle, in consultation with HF&H consultants, developed a model food recovery agreement. This agreement specifically is very customizable to help food recovery organizations and services with meeting their unique needs, but also to help the generators in meeting their needs. So this is highly customizable. It doesn't have to be used, but it can be used, and it's specifically to help them with compliance. But we have also added different sections into this agreement that are a little bit outside the scope of what's included in SB 1383's regulations. So for example, we included examples of how there are cost sharing models for food recovery, where maybe the generator and the food recovery organization are sharing some of the costs of recovering this food, instead of all of the costs falling on the food recovery organization or service. But it also was developed to help protect against donation dumping, also to ensure that edible food is recovered in a safe and effective manner, but mostly to assist with compliance and make sure that food recovery is done in a reliable, professional, and safe manner. This model food recovery agreement can be found on the SB 1383 Education and Outreach Resources webpage. If you scroll down to the bottom of the webpage, it has all of the SB 1383 model tools, and this is one of them. Next slide, please. So edible food recovery capacity planning. This is the next policy component I will be discussing. Next slide. So counties, in collaboration with cities, special districts that provide solid waste collection services, and regional agencies located within the counties, will need to complete a capacity planning analysis, really to determine, do we have sufficient capacity to meet our edible food recovery needs? So the first thing they will have to do as part of this analysis is actually, they're going to need to identify their tier 1 and their tier 2 commercial edible food generators. So that's the first step. But then what they'll do, once they know who the generators are, is they need to estimate the amount of edible food that will be disposed by the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 commercial edible food generators located within the county and jurisdictions within the county. Next slide. Again, as they're all collaborating together, they will need to then, once they know, okay, this is the amount of food that's going to be disposed, or it's estimated to be disposed by these generators, they'll need to consult with their food recovery organizations and services that are operating in their county and identify, okay, what capacity do you have to recover edible food? So we're identifying existing capacity. Then they also need to look at, okay, are there any plans for new or expanded food recovery capacity or expanded food recovery organizations and services, things like that. They're going to need to really look at what is our current capacity? Are there plans for new capacity? Beyond that, then what they will do is identify, okay, now do we need any additional capacity to meet our edible food recovery needs? So this third check mark that you're seeing, the identify if any, the amount of new or expanded capacity needed, that's really linked to that first requirement I was talking about, where you need to estimate the amount of edible food that's going to be disposed of by Tier 1 and Tier 2 generators. So that's the first step. Then what capacity do you have? And then, all right, now that we know the amount that's going to be disposed and the capacity that we have, do we have sufficient capacity to recover or to meet our needs to recover that amount of edible food that's estimated to be disposed? And these are all the things that go into completing a capacity planning analysis. One thing I will mention is that CalRecycle has been working very hard on developing tools and resources to assist counties and jurisdictions with meeting these requirements. So we are developing a capacity planning calculator tool specifically for edible food recovery. We are developing a survey that counties and jurisdictions can give to their local food recovery organizations and services to identify what their current capacity is. We're also working on a tool to help them identify their Tier 1 and their Tier 2 generators. So there are going to be resources available to help you with meeting these requirements. Next slide. And again, very important, in order to complete this analysis, you absolutely will have to consult with your food recovery organizations and services that are operating in your area. Any entity that is contacted by the county or the jurisdiction must respond to the requests within 60 days. Next slide. Also, if the county determines that edible food recovery capacity is needed, then the county must notify any jurisdiction that lacks capacity and let them know that they are required then to submit an implementation schedule to CalRecycle. For time's sake, I won't be able to get into all of that, but if you have questions about the implementation schedule, we would be happy to answer them. For anyone that follows the regulations closely, the capacity planning requirements are in section 18992.2, and that is specific for edible food recovery capacity and can answer more of your questions directly. And again, for all of this, if you do need to submit an implementation schedule, it's also critical that you would still be consulting with local food recovery organizations and services. Next slide. So the jurisdiction edible food recovery program. I'm going to start to go a little bit faster for time's sake because we do have one more policy to get through after this, but jurisdictions will be required to implement local edible food recovery programs. And as part of their programs, they will need to educate commercial edible food generators. They will need to increase commercial edible food generators' access to food recovery organizations and services. That's particularly important in rural areas throughout California. They will need to also monitor commercial edible food generators' compliance with the requirements that I spoke of earlier. So this is the enforcement piece and is absolutely critical to ensuring that the maximum amount of edible food is being recovered and that California does achieve this 20% edible food recovery goal. And finally, jurisdictions will be required to increase edible food recovery capacity if it is determined that they do not have sufficient capacity to meet their needs. We also included language in this section of the regulations. It is not a requirement, but rather language to encourage jurisdictions to think about creative methods that can be used to help cover their costs of implementing this program. So the language states that a jurisdiction may, and we emphasize and underline the word may because it's may, not shall, but a jurisdiction may fund their program through franchise fees, local assessments, or other funding mechanisms. And I want to bring your attention to franchise fees. We are seeing some very creative methods that have been implemented into franchise agreements. They're including food recovery in franchise agreements in a very creative way. Typically, it's voluntary, where commercial accounts can voluntarily opt into participating in the food recovery program that they offer. But that's one way that can be used to think through how do we develop a sustainable funding source to help cover some of our costs, and also to help fund some of the food recovery organizations or help fund the food recovery organizations that are operating in our area and doing the most work. So we also have a model franchise agreement, similar to the model food recovery agreement that we developed. This is something that was developed to assist with compliance. And that model franchise agreements also includes different food recovery provisions. So again, that's something that I would highly recommend looking at. As I mentioned, just like the Model Food Recovery Agreement, it is on the SB 1383 Education and Outreach Resources webpage at the bottom of the page. Next slide. A little bit more about education and outreach. Really, this is just to make sure that food recovery their program is widespread, that generators are able to locate food recovery organizations and services to work with, things like that. So jurisdictions will be required to develop a list of food recovery organizations and services that are operating in the jurisdiction. That list will need to be updated annually. And if you look on the slide, you can see what the list needs to include. Jurisdictions then, this is very important, they need to educate commercial edible food generators about their food recovery program, about the specific requirements that generators will be subject to, and about where commercial edible food generators can find a list of food recovery organizations and services that are operating in the jurisdiction. So that's really important because the jurisdiction has to develop that list, but then that list is only going to be very helpful if then the generator knows where to find the list. So the list serves a couple different purposes. One, it helps generators with identifying, okay, this is a potential organization or service that I could contract with and to comply with 1383. So that's fantastic. But another reason why the list is very important is because it gives jurisdictions the opportunity to say, these are the food recovery organizations and services that we feel would be the most appropriate to include on this list to help us with our edible food recovery program. But also it helps jurisdictions identify, okay, these are most likely the organizations and services that we would like to contact and reach out to about their capacity to help us complete our capacity planning analysis and answer some of those questions if there are any capacity gaps that need to be addressed. Next slide. The enforcement piece. This goes back to that jurisdiction edible food recovery program requirement that I mentioned, where they need to monitor commercial edible food generators' compliance. Jurisdictions must have an enforcement and inspection program that includes inspections to verify that commercial edible food generators do in fact have a contract or written agreement with a food recovery organization or service, and that the generators are maintaining records. So I didn't mention this earlier, but commercial edible food generators also do have some record keeping requirements. These are not reporting requirements, but they are record keeping requirements. So specifically, they need to maintain a record of a copy of their contract or written agreement. They need to maintain a record of the established frequency that the food is being collected by the food recovery organization or service that they work with, the types of food that will be recovered, and the total pounds of food recovered per month. The inspections of Tier 1 generators will have to begin in 2022, and the Tier 2 generator inspections will begin in 2024. What's really critical to note here is that These inspections do not need to be duplicative. They can be combined with existing mandatory inspections. So for example, if the health department is already inspecting many of these facilities through their routine food facility inspections, and there is nothing in these regulations that would prohibit a jurisdiction from contracting with their local environmental health department to fulfill this requirement. So that's very important. These can be combined with those existing inspections. Next slide. So for food recovery organizations and services, this is the final policy component I will discuss today. A food recovery organization or service that voluntarily chooses to participate in SB 1383, and when I say voluntarily, what I mean is nothing is requiring a food recovery organization or service to enter into a contract or written agreement pursuant to SB 1383. However, if a food recovery organization or service does choose to enter into a contract or written agreement with a commercial edible food generator pursuant to SB 1383, then they will be required to maintain records and report certain information. So Julia, if you can just press the next slide, I think there's something for reporting as well. Perfect, thank you. So for record keeping, they will need to maintain a record of the name, address, and contact information for each Tier 1 and Tier 2 commercial edible food generator that they've established a contract with pursuant to SB 1383. They will also need to maintain a record of the quantity in pounds of edible food collected from each Tier 1 and Tier 2 commercial edible food generator that they're working with per month. And again, these are just the Tier 1 and Tier 2 generators that they're working with. For reporting, food recovery organizations and services where their primary address is physically located within the jurisdiction, they need to, this is a little confusing actually, the way that this is written. If you are a mandated food recovery organization or service, meaning you have entered into a contract or written agreement pursuant to SB 1383 with a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 commercial edible food generator, then you will be required to report the total pounds of edible food that were recovered in the previous calendar year to one jurisdiction, and that is the jurisdiction where your primary address is physically located. So you're not reporting to multiple jurisdictions, just the one jurisdiction, and you're only reporting on the total pounds collected in the previous calendar year from the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 commercial edible food generators that you've established a contract or written agreement with pursuant to SB 1383. You are not required to report any donor names. No proprietary food donor information is to be reported. Just the only requirement in SB 1383 is that you report the total pounds recovered in the previous calendar year. So I know that this can be a little confusing. If you have questions about it, we're more than happy to answer them for you. But again, I think the most important thing to note is that you are not required to report any donor names, and you are only required to report to one jurisdiction, and that is the jurisdiction where your primary address is physically located. Next slide. So in closing, just some key edible food recovery dates. As of 2022, jurisdictions will need to establish their edible food recovery program. The Tier 1 generators must be compliant. Jurisdictions will be required to begin their edible food recovery capacity planning analyses. Jurisdictions will begin their food recovery education and outreach, which is to be done on an annual basis. And jurisdictions will begin their inspections of the Tier 1 generators and of food recovery organizations and services that have chosen to participate in SB 1383. 2 years later, the Tier 2 generators must be compliant. This is all as of January 1st, 2024. Jurisdiction inspections of Tier 2 commercial edible food generators can begin, and jurisdictions as of 2024 can take enforcement action against non-compliant entities. Next slide. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for your time and for listening. We're happy to answer any of your questions now.
Thank you so much, Martine. So just a quick reminder for those of you who logged on after we did the instructions for the Q&A session, please just follow the instructions shown on this slide. If you're watching through the CalEPA broadcast, you can email your questions to the SLCP inbox. If you're using the GoToWebinar platform, just type in your question into the question pane. So with that, we will go to the first question, and I have Sarah Sanders from CalRecycle here with me, helping me to do the Q&A session, so I'll pass it over to her.
Our first question is from Caitlin. Caitlin, you are now unmuted. Please ask the question and state your affiliation.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome, thanks. My name is Caitlin Lellis. I'm with the County of San Diego, and I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit on how the food recovery organizations, like how it's voluntary that they participate in SB 1383. I'm still just a little confused.
Yeah, so great question. So nothing in SB 1383 requires food recovery organizations to enter into a contract or written agreement. There are requirements placed on generators, but not on the food recovery organization or service. So for example, if I am a supermarket and I'm a tier 1 generator and I go to the local food bank and I say, hey, SB 1383 requires me to enter into a contract or written agreement and I want to work with you. They don't have to enter, they don't have to say, yes, okay, well, it requires me to do the same. There's no requirement on them to work with that generator. So it's really has to be that they also want to enter into that contract or written agreement, and not just a wanting, but it's based on, do they have the resources necessary to enter into that contract or written agreement? We did this for a very specific reason. We did not want food recovery organizations and services to be required to enter into agreements where they didn't have the resources or the capacity to be able to do that, or to be able to recover that type of food, for example. So I hope that that clarifies it a little bit more. But did it? Because I can answer more if you need me to.
No, I think that makes sense. And then in that case, then for the required reporting from food recovery organizations, they're only required to report if they are accepting food from tier 1 and tier 2 generators?
Correct. So if they have entered into contracts or written agreements with tier 1 and tier 2 generators, then they are required to report. And they're only required to report on the total pounds collected in the previous calendar year from tier 1 and tier 2 generators. So if they're working with other groups or other food donors that are not mandated to comply with 1383, they don't need to report those pounds, just the pounds recovered from tier 1 and tier 2.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add one thought there, and Caitlin, good question. I think we've heard pretty consistently that food recovery organizations are very interested in participating in 1383, and also just reinforce the point that some organizations are not equipped to handle certain types of foods. So edible food generators may need to be working with more than one food recovery organization or service to help recover that food. But in general, those organizations have been very receptive to this program. Thanks for the question.
All right, thank you so much, Kyle and Martine. So our next question is from Colleen Foster. Colleen, you can unmute yourself to ask your question.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. This is Colleen Foster, Environmental Officer for City of Oceanside. I have a couple questions, so I guess I should just try with the first one. I'm not sure. I don't want to overtake other people's questions. So the first question I posted what are the best management practices in identifying these generators per each tier? Business license practices are not uniform across the state, and cities regularly do not have all of this information. So will we need to fund staffing to try to figure this out?
That's a fantastic question, Colleen. So I mentioned very briefly in the presentation that CalRecycle has had a small team working on developing resources that really provide guidance to jurisdictions on how best to identify these different commercial edible food generators, because as you mentioned, there are going to be different sources of information that you would need to refer to be able to identify them. So I want to ask Kara Morgan if she can, if she's there, because, hi, Kara. So Kara and her team have been working on this. Do you want to add anything about that?
Sure. I think, thanks, Colleen, for your question. We're excited to roll out some guidance that really is going to help increase the efficiency in identifying tier 1 and tier 2 generators. We've done a lot of work with folks that have been working in this space based upon their experience. Our team did a lot of our own research and investigation. And what we've come up with is some very efficient approaches to identifying tier 1 and tier 2 generators. That guidance will be coming out in early March, and then we'll also have a webinar that kind of dives deep into that guidance. There are a couple of, I would say, tier 2 generators that are a little more challenging, particularly right now during COVID, and that primarily relates to large events. Because there aren't a lot happening right now, so a little bit harder to maybe identify, but we cover that in the guidance. We also in the guidance have answered a lot of the challenging questions that jurisdictions that started identifying generators faced, and we think that this guidance will really help in that respect. So stay tuned, but it is going to be super helpful.
I just wanted to add real quickly too, and Colleen, thanks for the question. And I think I referenced stakeholders providing input before, and Colleen has been so instrumental in making comments and giving ideas and through that rulemaking process. And Colleen, I always encourage you, if you have ideas too on how to identify those generators, we're very interested to hear about it too. So thanks for the question.
Thank you all. You'll hear from me. Thank you.
Our next question is from Steve. Steve, you are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. Steve White, County of San Diego, recycling specialist. I work with Caitlin here as well. I've seen quite a few apps pop up across the country in different cities that allow restaurants to highly discount their leftover food. I'm just curious if that comes up here, would that count towards the edible food donation piece?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's nothing in the regulations that prohibits that kind of activity. As someone who works at CalRecycle, I can say with confidence that we absolutely encourage that kind of activity. It's really for the edible food recovery component in these regulations. This is really focused on food that would otherwise be disposed, so would otherwise be sent to landfill. There's nothing that prohibits these generators from, if they still intend to serve or sell that food, that they can still do that. They only need to have the food be recovered if it would be at that point where it's otherwise going to be disposed. And what you're talking about is food where they're really trying to find a way to still sell it. So that's absolutely okay.
Yeah, Martine, I would just add another good question there. And we're seeing some other examples outside of restaurants too, grocery stores that are doing this and repurposing or discounting or coming up with different ways to use this food, and we really encourage that for sure. And then also, and I don't know if it's been said before, but there are a number of frequently asked questions that are on the webpage. And so I encourage you to look at those. One of those that leaps to mind is that a question about employees taking this food as well. And that's certainly something that's allowed under this program too. It does not constrain the ability to provide that food to employees of a restaurant or some other commercial edible food generator. So thank you.
Great, appreciate the answer, thanks.
All right, thank you so much. So we are actually going to go back to Colleen. Colleen, if you could just state the question that has already been answered in the GoToWebinar pane, just for those who are listening over the broadcast, that would be great. And then we'll answer your question again out loud for everyone to hear. So Colleen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Thank you. So what would be the baseline for the counties to determine which city does not have adequate capacity? For example, what is adequate capacity? How is this defined and not arbitrary? Also, what is the timeline for reporting to CalRecycle if the county determines a specific city does not have adequate capacity?
I'm sorry, was that question answered in the question pane, or are we supposed to answer that?
Yeah, that was not actually answered in the question pane, so go ahead and answer that, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so the answer I'd say is pretty complex. I'm not sure that I would be able to answer it just in this session today. But Colleen, the question is very important, and that's part of all of these resources that multiple teams at CalRecycle have been working on developing, the past several months to make sure that we are providing the resources that are necessary to really help counties and jurisdictions comply with these capacity planning requirements. So Kara probably has more to add to it, but I would also love to set up a call with you to discuss this in more detail to make sure that you guys have everything you need going forward, and that we can be as much assistance as possible to help you guys complete these analyses.
Thanks, Martine. I'll just add, so the ultimate responsibility is on the individual jurisdiction that has not identified available either existing, new, or expanded edible food infrastructure. So that will happen through the calculations that are done by each jurisdiction. There can be collaboration set up within the county and the jurisdiction. So some, depending on that collaboration, the county might do some tasks and individual jurisdictions might do some tasks, but the ultimate calculation is done by each individual jurisdiction, and that data is submitted to the county. The county should be laying out the timeframes in order for it to submit its report to CalRecycle, and that first report is due August 1, 2022. When a jurisdiction does their calculation, and if they determine that there's a delta, so meaning that they have quantified all of the disposed edible food, that number, then they have come up with what their either existing, new, or expanded infrastructure is that they know they have. That delta is what's going to trigger an implementation schedule. The individual jurisdiction will be required to submit the implementation schedule to CalRecycle. The county's responsibility is to inform CalRecycle that there is a jurisdiction that needs to submit an implementation schedule, and the county is required to inform that jurisdiction that they are submitting their report to CalRecycle, and that jurisdiction then has 120 days from the submission of that report to submit the implementation schedule to CalRecycle. So I hope that was helpful.
It's very helpful. I look forward to those webinars. I guess one follow-up to that is, and I'm not just asking for my city, I'm also asking for other organizations, but does the capacity have to be within the jurisdiction itself? So if you have a more affluent community that lacks social resources, but those generators in that community is donating food to agencies within the county, is that capacity that could be attributed to the more affluent community, for example?
Kara, do you want to take it, or?
Sure. Yeah, and this is where I think, to Martine's point, the complexity comes into play. As each of the jurisdictions in the county collaborate on identifying the available existing, new, or expanded capacity for edible food, there has to be that collaboration. But yes, it does not have to be recovery that's happening within that specific jurisdiction. And there are a lot of really innovative approaches that are happening, including, national organizations that are entering this space. And there are companies that are also working on kind of like brokering edible food and getting it to recovery organizations. So I think we're going to see a lot more innovation. But again, just to answer your question, the actual recovery does not have to occur within that jurisdiction. So an commercial edible food generator could have an agreement with a food recovery organization that's, a few jurisdictions over, for example. So I think we'll see a lot of different models happening.
All right, thank you so much. So I'm going to read out a question really quickly that has already been responded to. So those listening over the broadcast can hear the question and our response. So the question that was asked is, will CalRecycle be conducting oversight over educational institutions for edible food, since education agencies are out of the jurisdiction of cities and counties? And Alan, you answered that, so I'm going to toss it over to you to just provide your response so folks can hear it.
Yeah, thanks, Julia, and thanks, Colleen, for your question there. So with regards to your question, the answer is the regulations outlined within section 18996.7, the enforcement actions that the department will be taking on local education agencies. Additionally, I do want to add that all jurisdictions will not enforce non-local entities and local education agencies. Jurisdictions are still to provide non-local entities and local education agencies with edible food recovery education and outreaches, and that's pursuant to section 18985.2 of the regulations. So hopefully that answers your question, Colleen.
I think it does. My question is, do I need to inspect the edible food inspections? You have educational agencies identified if they have a commercial kitchen on site. Does that mean I need to inspect those entities, or will CalRecycle be taking care of that? Because your answer just says I need to provide education outreach. Doesn't clarify inspection.
Yeah. Inspection of, so Carrie, do you want to jump in there? I'm trying to process that.
So the way that the regulations are written, it does not exclude the inspections from any state, non-local entities, local education agencies. So it states that the jurisdiction must conduct inspections on any tier 1 and tier 2 commercial edible food generator that's located in your jurisdiction. The nexus is that if there is an enforcement action that needs to happen, that's where CalRecycle steps in to conduct that, to follow through on that enforcement. We still have to work out what that process is for a jurisdiction that determines a commercial edible food generator is out of compliance. So stay tuned for that. We have to work through kind of how that will work.
Our next question is from Dominique. You are now unmuted. Please ask your question.
Hi, thank you. So my question is regarding the tier 1 generators specifically for events. So for the edible food recovery agreement, sorry, I forgot to mention my affiliation with the city of Encinitas. So are the event organizers required to set up an edible food recovery agreement for the entire event, or is each kind of vendor that's selling food at the event required to set up an agreement?
Thanks, Dominique. That's a great question. And just to clarify, I'm not sure if you said tier 1, but large events are tier 2. So as of 2024, they would be required to comply, but it's actually the former of what you were just saying. So the operator of that large event is required to have that contract or written agreement developed, so that way each of the vendors then operating at that large event would be able to donate their surplus edible food if they have any available.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dominique.
All right, so our next question is coming from Adrina. Adrina, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question. Okay, so I will ask Adrina's question. What are the other funding mechanisms for jurisdiction edible food recovery programs?
So it's a really good question, and it's still kind of a new space where we are, we're seeing some innovative things happening in Orange County, for example. One of the more common examples that we're seeing is kind of what I was discussing with it's built into the franchise agreement. So like we said, this is typically happening on a voluntary basis. And what I mean by that is that the hauler offers a food recovery program, or they have some sort of food recovery program that their commercial accounts can voluntarily choose to participate in. And if they participate in it, then they have a slight rate increase, but that's specifically because this service is being offered to them and they've chosen to participate in it. And then through that rate increase, a portion of that money then goes to the food recovery organization and service that is then collecting that food. So there are different models out there, but again, it's still pretty new. So then that's why when I discuss those options, I say creative, because part of the reason why they're creative is because many of them are novel. It's brand new. So to the greatest extent possible, when we learn of different options that are out there that have been developed, we're providing case studies, things like that, and we will make those more widely available as we learn of different funding mechanisms. But something else that can definitely be promoted is the CalRecycle Model Food Recovery Agreement and the cost sharing models that are included in that, where, for example, the food recovery organization or service could charge the generators a fee to help cover some of their costs. But again, that's really between the generator and the food recovery organization or service. So when it comes to helping jurisdictions cover their costs, it's something that we are looking at very closely, looking at different examples throughout the state and trying to promote them as soon as we learn of them.
I just add real quickly, sorry, Sarah, I just add to that, I completely agree. These models are just now forming, and we'll gladly be sharing how they play out and what they look like. But one other funding mechanism that has been in play that I wouldn't consider a sustainable funding mechanism has been our California Climate Investment Funding. And we have a food waste prevention and rescue grant. Some of you on the line have participated in that. It's funded food recovery infrastructure. And to date, we've put out funded about 70 projects with another, hopefully 13 to 20 or so on the way with our current funding offering that can help build that infrastructure. We hope to see, I optimistically say that, I hope to see future cap and trade funding as well, so we can build upon that, and organizations and jurisdictions and so forth can compete for that. So that's one other opportunity. Thanks.
Hey, also, we are coming close to 10 o'clock and we have to go to the next topic. So we're going to do one more question from Jessica, and then Kyle and Martine, excuse me, will continue to answer your questions in the question and answer. So they'll just type it out. For those of you who are listening to the broadcast, we can't get the questions to you, but we'll try to figure out a way to get it to you. If not, you could log on to the GoToWebinar and you could see the questions that have been typed out through that function as well. And again, if you need that address, feel free to email the SLCP inbox. Thanks so much. Julia, Sarah, can you turn it over to Jessica for the last question?
Jessica, you are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself and ask your question. I will go ahead and read Jessica's question. It is, what is the benefit of the formal edible food agreements for generators and recovery organizations? If I understand correctly, it's not a requirement, but an option to have the written agreement right. That's it.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Jessica, for the question. To clarify, it absolutely is a requirement for the commercial edible food generators. They are required to have a contract or written agreement. And so the benefit of that, there are many, by having a contract or written agreement, it's really in place to make sure that the generator's needs and the food recovery organization and service that they're working with, that their food recovery needs are met. In the food recovery world, there are a lot of times where maybe the generator has food available that needs to be picked up and the food recovery organization does serve it, food recovery organization doesn't come to collect it at the time they said they would. Or conversely, the generator is donating a bunch of food and the food recovery organization and service has one of their drivers come to collect it and they take it back to the organization only to find that, on the outside it looks okay, but once you get into the amount of food available, it's essentially trash. This is food that absolutely could not be used to feed people. Or if it was, it would be very dangerous because it's not safe at that point. So the food recovery agreement is intended, really, these contracts and written agreements are really adding a level of professionalism, reliability, and safety into food recovery. Not saying that that's not already there, but now we're mandating that there is a contract or written agreement to make sure that it is there. There are also record-keeping requirements for these generators. So the contract or written agreement, that model agreement that CalRecycle developed, and maybe that's where the misunderstanding was, that we developed a customizable model tool. You can use it, but you don't have to. You can have your own contract or written agreement, but the tool that we developed really includes a lot, so it could really help you a lot with compliance and even going above and beyond compliance. But that also includes sections where you could determine who would be maintaining those records, things like that. It also includes cost sharing provisions. Ultimately, in order to achieve the 20% edible food recovery goal, we need first and foremost to make sure that food is recovered safely, and then that it's recovered efficiently, it's professional, and that it's all done reliably, things like that. So it is absolutely critical, and the generators have direct requirements placed on them where they have to have those contracts and written agreements.
So thanks so much, Kyle and Martine, for this presentation. Again, they'll continue to answer your questions in the question and answer chat function. So watch out for your question to be answered. Now I want to turn it over to the procurement team. So Michelle Dewey, if you wanted to start your presentation. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and wonderful presentation, Kyle and Martine. Today, I will be giving you an overview of the procurement requirements outlined in the SB 1383 regulations. We did want to leave the bulk of today's session available for Q&A, so this slideshow is a bit condensed, but if you do need further information on the procurement requirements, please feel free to check out our webpage, contact us with any questions, and of course, reach out in today's Q&A. The procurement requirements are designed to help build the markets for the products coming out of organics recycling facilities, and to help close the loop on recovering and using the organic waste that will be diverted as a result of SB 1383. Today, I'll be discussing two distinct procurement requirements for jurisdictions: to procure recovered organic waste products and to procure recycled content paper. Next slide, thanks. First, I'll talk about recovered organic waste products. These are shown here and include mulch, compost, energy products from anaerobic digestion, including transportation fuel, electricity, and gas used for heating, and electricity from biomass conversion. The regulations do outline specific details as to what makes these products eligible, so I do encourage you to take a good look at that regulatory text. But the key is that these products are made from California landfill diverted organic waste, and that they are made at specific types of facilities or operations. Jurisdictions will be required to undertake this procurement. So for the purposes of recovered organic waste products, jurisdictions are defined as cities, counties, or cities and counties. So how much of these products do cities and counties need to procure? CalRecycle will be assigning an annual procurement target to each jurisdiction based on their population. The formula you see here is from the regulations, and demonstrates how a jurisdiction's procurement target is calculated and how conversion factors are then used to convert the target into quantities of end products. A jurisdiction's procurement target is multiplied by a per capita procurement factor defined in the regulations as 0.08 tons of organic waste per person, and the result is the jurisdiction's procurement target measured in tons of organic waste. And every 5 years, the jurisdiction's procurement target will be recalculated to account for changes in their population. The regulations then outline the conversion factors that are used to convert each jurisdiction's targets into quantities of recovered organic waste products. So determine the quantity of end products the jurisdiction would need to procure. The target is multiplied by these conversion factors. We built in multiple options into the procurement requirements to provide jurisdictions with flexibility in meeting their procurement target. And in keeping with this theme, jurisdictions can customize their procurement and can choose what mix of products they'd like to procure to meet their target. So they can meet their target entirely through one product, such as compost, or through a mix of compost, such as 50% compost and 50% mulch. This slide further highlights additional procurement options that were built into the regulations. Jurisdictions can meet their procurement target either through direct procurement, in which they are directly procuring and using the products themselves or giving it away, or through a direct service provider, in which a jurisdiction has a written contract or agreement with an external entity to procure and use those eligible products on behalf of the jurisdiction. So these entities might be waste haulers or other contractors. Procurement also does not necessarily mean purchase. A jurisdiction that produces its own eligible compost or eligible products or receives it in another way, such as free delivery of compost through their hauler, and uses this product can count this towards their procurement target. It's also important to note that procurement can be what we call a paper transaction. The products that are actually procured do not have to be produced within the jurisdiction, made from their own collected organic waste, or even used within the jurisdiction. So a city, for example, could purchase eligible compost from anywhere in the state and use this towards their target. Lastly, CalRecycle has built a mechanism into the regulations where a jurisdiction's procurement target can be lowered to ensure that a jurisdiction does not procure more recovered organic waste products than it can use. This was included because the intent of these requirements is not to force jurisdictions to procure or buy more than they have a need for. So a jurisdiction may qualify for an adjusted procurement target if their calculated procurement target does exceed their previous year's procurement of energy products. So this would be quantities of transportation fuel, electricity, or gas used for heating applications in the previous year. And this mechanism is triggered by a jurisdiction as part of their annual report, and the jurisdiction must keep records and report to CalRecycle these quantities of energy products procured in the previous calendar year to support this reduced target. This slide shows just a few examples of how a jurisdiction could use these products to meet their goal. Compost and mulch may be used for things such as soil covers or soil amendments at parks, gardens, or open spaces. It may also be used for erosion control measures, or a city or county could host compost or mulch giveaways, and this can count towards their target. For transportation fuel from anaerobic digestion, this may be used to fuel a jurisdiction's bus or waste fleets, or if they have a direct service provider relationship with an entity such as their franchised waste hauler, to use this fuel on behalf of the jurisdiction, this can count towards their target. Gas used for heating from renewable gas from anaerobic digestion may be used to heat any needs such as on-site space heating, cooking, or to heat equipment such as the digesters themselves. And last, electricity from biomass conversion or from renewable gas from anaerobic digestion could be used to power any needs, such as on-site at the organics recycling facility itself, or really any other buildings or infrastructure used by the jurisdiction or their direct service providers. Jurisdictions are required to maintain records so that CalRecycle can verify compliance as needed. This will include information such as the name, physical location, and contact information of the entities from whom products were procured, a general description of how products were used, invoices or other similar records of procurement, and this is for both direct procurement and for procurement through direct service providers. Please note that there are additional record keepings outlined in the regulations for certain products, including mulch, which requires records of the adopted ordinance or enforceable mechanism, ensuring that the mulch meets the requirements in the regulations. And there are also record keeping requirements for energy products from wastewater treatment facilities or from biomass conversion facilities. The second part of the procurement requirements are for the procurement of recycled content paper, and these are entirely separate from the recovered organic waste product procurement requirements discussed so far. So unlike the requirements discussed so far, this is instead a blanket requirement for all paper purchases. So there is no target of how much needs to be purchased. Rather, all purchases of paper products need to meet these requirements. It also includes a broader scope of jurisdictions. So it's not just cities, counties, or cities and counties that are subject to these requirements, but it also includes special districts that provide solid waste collection services. SB 1383 does build upon existing requirements, which many local public entities already meet, such as the minimum recycled content purchasing requirements for paper products. However, some new requirements added are that paper purchases must be recyclable under Federal Trade Commission guidance, meaning that a substantial majority of the population where these products are sold does have access to recycling programs for the product at the end of its useful life. Jurisdictions must also require vendors from whom they purchase these products to provide certifications to the jurisdiction of the post-consumer content in these products and that the products are recyclable. And there are a variety of paper products and printing and writing paper products included in the definitions in the regulatory text. So I encourage you to take a look at that, but it includes a wide range of products such as paper janitorial supplies, cartons, packaging, file folders, envelopes, and most printing and writing paper. There are also record-keeping requirements for recycled content paper purchases, and this includes information such as copies of receipts, invoices, or other proofs of purchase that describes the procurement of paper, and those copies of certifications or other verifications from the vendors that is documenting that minimum post-consumer content of the products and that they are recyclable. This slide gives a timeline for SB 1383 implementation. So you'll see here in red are some important dates for procurement. The procurement requirements do become enforceable in 2022 with the rest of the regulations. There is one delay for compliance with the procurement requirements for rural counties and jurisdictions located within rural counties that are exempt from the organic waste collection requirements. These entities are not required to comply with the recovered organic waste product procurement requirements until 2027. However, all jurisdictions, including rural jurisdictions, will be required to comply with the recycled content paper procurement requirements in 2022. And jurisdictions will be informed annually of their procurement target through posting on our website and through direct written notification. Jurisdictions can calculate their procurement targets right now using the formula outlined in the regulations. However, their official procurement target for 2022 will be taking into account newer population data than is currently available. We expect this data to be available in May of this year, and CalRecycle will be providing notice to jurisdictions of their official targets following the release of this data. And as a reminder, the procurement target for each jurisdiction will be recalculated every 5 years to account for changes in their population. So the procurement target for the year of 2022 will be in effect for 5 years until 2027. There are requirements included in Article 13 of the regulations for jurisdictions to report annually to CalRecycle to demonstrate their compliance with the SB 1383 regulations. If jurisdictions are procuring mulch, there is a one-time initial compliance report due in April of 2022, and this is the only instance of reporting outside of the annual reports. For annual reporting, the information included in this will be the amount of each recovered organic waste product procured during the previous calendar year And if they are implementing a reduced procurement target, they will also need to report to CalRecycle those quantities of energy products that were procured in the calendar year prior to the reporting period. Lastly, this slide highlights some of the tools and resources that are currently available to help jurisdictions implement the procurement requirements. The procurement calculator tool was recently released on our website and through our listserv. It can be used by jurisdictions to calculate their procurement target and the quantities of recovered organic waste products they would need to procure to meet this target. And it may be helpful to jurisdictions in planning for their procurement, for tracking their progress towards meeting their procurement targets. So we encourage you to check it out. We did host a webinar on the use of this tool last week, but it was recorded in case you missed it. And we will be announcing through our SLCP listserv when that recording and those slides are available on our website. So do stay tuned through that in case you missed it. Another tool available to jurisdictions is our model procurement policy developed with HF&H consultants. This is a customizable template for jurisdictions who are planning to develop and adopt a procurement policy, and it can be customized to reflect what specific products a jurisdiction plans to procure and how they plan to carry out their policy. We also have various case studies, webpage resources, and FAQs on our website, so do please check those out. Please let us know if there are any other resources you'd like to see highlighted on our website that you don't currently see. And we are continuously adding more resources and in development of additional FAQs and content for our website. So please do continue to submit your questions through our SLCP listserv, through our inbox, and the questions you share with us today. Those are helpful to inform our next set of FAQs for posting online. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thanks. So that's it for my presentation. Please be sure you are signed up for our SLCP listserv to stay up to date on all developments. And again, this presentation was a pretty quick overview, but we encourage you to check out our website, those resources we have, and to contact us with any questions if you need further clarification. Thanks so much for listening in, and we are so excited to hear from all of our Southern California stakeholders today on questions you have. I'm sure there will be a lot of out-of-the-box scenarios and questions with some nuance that we haven't yet considered. So for these questions, we may need to take these offline and get back to you at a later date. But if this is the case, we will be following up with you. And again, for today's Q&A session, we do want to focus those questions on implementation and clarification questions. But before I open it up for the Q&A session, I would like to hand it over to my colleague, Kristen Pidcock. She will be touching on a number of our most frequently asked questions that we regularly address and that are also highlighted on our website. And this will hopefully address some of the questions you may have off the bat and hopefully guide some of your questions for today's Q&A. So take it away, Kristen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and good morning, everyone. As Michelle said, we're excited for the opportunity to hear your thoughts and your questions this morning, and we really do hope this will be helpful for you. So now I'm going to spend a few minutes touching on a couple of the most commonly asked questions that we receive, and we saw this as an opportunity to address some of those before we open up the floor for your questions today. So I will dive right in. So the first question is, how can a jurisdiction meet their procurement target? So for instance, can we sell a product to meet our target? Or if our organic waste is going to a compost facility that produces eligible products, could that count towards our target? And the regulations outline that procurement is achieved through the end use or giveaway of recovered organic waste products. So it does not include the sale of products, and it's not simply the production of the products or sending your organic waste to compost facilities. Procurement is achieved through that use or giveaway. And the intent of this is to encourage the demand and use of these products because that's where the most environmental benefits are realized. Another question we receive regarding what can count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target is when an entity in a jurisdiction that's using recovered organic waste products. So could that count? An example of this would be if the local waste hauler fuels its trucks with eligible transportation fuel derived from renewable gas. So could that count towards the procurement target? And in that situation, it could be eligible, but there would need to be that established direct service provider relationship for this to be an option. So there would need to be a written agreement or a contract in place that's defining this direct service provider relationship with the jurisdiction and then the end user. And if there's not that written agreement or relationship established, then that external entity is not considered part of the jurisdiction, so that would not count. The next question is, what if a jurisdiction procures a product that's partially eligible? So in other words, a portion of the product is produced from landfill diverted organic waste while part of it's not. And this could be, electricity produced from eligible facilities, and those facilities are receiving some eligible feedstocks, while they may also be receiving feedstocks that are not landfill diverted. And can these partially eligible products count towards the target? So in short, only the portion of that product that comes from recovered organic waste can count. The regulations outline that products that can meet a jurisdiction's procurement target need to meet the definition of recovered organic waste. So there's a lot of other details to look at when providing guidance, but in general, they need to be from California landfill diverted organic waste, and they must be produced at a permitted or otherwise authorized facility or operation. So we need to look at those details and then determine if that portion of the product can count. And if you have questions about specific products, you can always reach out to us and we can look at those products and your situation a little bit deeper. So then I have two more questions here. Another question that we frequently get is, in what circumstances does mulch count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target? And mulch is eligible, it's an eligible procurement target, but it does need to meet the requirements outlined in the regulations. So among other things, the mulch must be produced at specific permitted facilities, and it must comply with land application standards. And the requirement for it to be produced at permitted facilities is to ensure that these products are being made from diverted solid waste, as well as helping support that landfill diversion goal of SB 1383. So you may notice that chipping and grinding operations are excluded, and this is because the feedstocks that are typically entering these types of facilities are not considered or defined as landfill diverted materials. The last question I have here is, under what circumstances can the gas produced at a POTW or publicly owned wastewater treatment facility count towards a jurisdiction's procurement target? And there are several requirements outlined in the regulations, but the key to remember is that this renewable gas must be produced from landfill diverted organic waste. So this wastewater treatment facility would need to be accepting eligible diverted organics from specific solid waste facilities, and the portion of gas produced from those diverted organic wastes is what may count towards the jurisdiction's procurement target. So I know that was a little quick, but with that, those are just a few of the frequently asked questions that we do get. As Michelle said, these questions and many more you can find on our SLCP website in the FAQ section. hopefully this was helpful in addressing some of your questions. And if you have more, we have our team here today to help answer those questions for you. So thank you for your time, and I'm going to pass it back to Julie to get us started with the Q&As. Thank you.
Hey, also before Julia starts with the Q&A again, I just want to let you know that our edible food team may have to leave a little bit early, but we will try to answer as many questions as we can before they have to leave. And if they do leave before we get to the response for your question, they will follow up with an email. So thank you so much. And Julia, back to you.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. So for just a quick refresh on how we're going to do the Q&A session, please just follow the instructions shown on this slide. And with that, I'm going to toss it over to Sarah Sanders to take it away.
Our first question is from Colleen. Colleen, you are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
So in particular, a lot of cities actually don't have purchasing agents. So for example, in our agency, the majority of employees actually have the ability to purchase. So we have several thousand purchasing agents. And the issue that I see with this is documentation. Receipts do not typically speak to recycled content, paper products, etc. How is that being addressed if receipts do not have this information when jurisdictions be found in non-compliance? I know you guys provided an answer to that. I do have a follow-up to that answer, though.
Thanks, Colleen. Yeah, I mean, this is a question we get fairly often. I think we've already gotten it a few times in the Q&A today. But the documentation for record keeping is, we're not prescriptive on what form that might take. It could include, things such as receipts or invoices, or documentation from websites, or other records, as I said in my response. I know that jurisdictions already have to meet public contract code requirements for recycled content that are unrelated to 1383. So I am curious how jurisdictions document that, but I think we're fairly open-ended as long as the letter of the regulation is met. And as you said, do you have anything to add, Michelle or Kristen or Alan? Okay.
Well, I mean, this is the first regulation where, receipts are now going to be required for documentation, and there's enforcement behind it. So recycled content, you have policies, you educate, you implement, but we haven't collected receipts before. The reality is financial systems require receipts. They don't necessarily require the website, that explains all the dynamics of the product. So it just looks like there'll be another layer of securing information that we'll need to figure out that is beyond general financial documentation.
Thanks for that note. Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, it will be an additional requirement that jurisdictions might not be already doing for record keeping. And I think there was another question related to this, and whether CalRecycle would be providing a software to track this. So maybe, I don't think that that's the case, but maybe Alan might be able to speak to this a little bit.
I guess we could jump ahead here. So I believe Annika Anderson asked the question, and I guess I could read the question out loud for Annika, or unless Annika, you're on the line, if you want to read your question out loud, and then I could answer.
All right, Annika, you're unmuted, so you can ask your question now.
Awesome, thank you so much. My question is in line with what Colleen previously asked about how jurisdictions are supposed to track all the receipts for paper products digitally, and if CalRecycle is going to be providing a software or some kind of tool to track these receipts and then submit them for our reports to you.
Yeah, good question, Annika, and it's a question that does come up frequently, and it is because of that, the department is taking action upon that. In regards to your question regarding the paper procurements, that is outlined in the regulations in section 18993.4. It has the details and requirements that are required to go into a jurisdiction's record keeping to meet the requirements for the regulations. In response to the department providing any software, I can say that the department is in the process of developing, and we're going through the process of developing electronic tool for jurisdictions to utilize, which is slated to be released in this summer of 2021. And that tool, and essentially the purpose of that tool would be to assist the jurisdiction's compliance with the record keeping requirements, not only for the paper procurement, but also for all the other record keeping requirements as outlined within the regulation. So stay tuned for more information on that. I know that there'll be a small bit and portion that I'll be speaking on, as well as the project manager of that tool there at CRA coming up here, I think later on this month. Does that answer your question, Annika? And I know, Colleen, we kind of dovetailed that to your question there as well.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, so our next question is going to come from Laurie Robinson. Laura, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question. Oops, sorry. So I will ask Laura's question for her. Her question is, will all of this procurement reporting be done within our CalRecycle annual reports?
Good question, Laura. Yes, it will be reported through your electronic annual report with CalRecycle. We currently have a team working on revisions to that reporting tool and incorporating all of the SB 1383 requirements to be reported through that, including procurement. So stay tuned for that.
Definitely, and the reporting for procurement to CalRecycle is pretty simple and straightforward. It's literally just the volumes of each material, and it's not even broken out by source as part of the reporting. But see the reporting requirements, and it'll be pretty obvious. The work and the complication comes in terms of record keeping in this case.
Our next question is from Brandon. You are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
My question comes from the need to build infrastructure and ultimately produce renewable natural gas. But you're competing against the LCFS program in terms of offtake for the RNG. So how do we keep a price check in place for the cost of the RNG for the communities?
Maybe I can speak to that a little bit. We may need to follow up offline to discuss it a little bit more. But these regulations are they're not additional to what entities already have to do under LCFS. So there will be likely, if somebody's already claiming LCFS credits for something, for a fuel produced and used, then it doesn't have any impact on how a jurisdiction might claim the use or giveaway of said products to meet 1383 procurement goals. But your question about markets and prices it gets pretty complicated, and I'd love to kind of follow up with you to talk through what the concerns are.
Yeah, that's fine. I think you're going to be a demand issue in regards to where supply is, and so yeah. It can get pretty quick.
Yeah, 1383 is to meet 1383 by 2025. We need a massive amount of new facilities and new infrastructure to divert new materials, and those materials will go to produce more products and increase demand. But there is a potential chicken and egg issue, and you have to have demand for products for facilities to want to produce said product and to have a healthy market. So that's in addition to everything else that 1383 does to try to increase the supply of products and divert materials, procurement does a little bit to work on the demand side of the equation.
All right, so our next question is from Patrick Tallarico. Patrick, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Sure, thank you. So it's just a quick question maybe about the procurement of paper recycled paper products. And so I just wondered, most people purchase their stuff through like an Office Depot office store. And so are you going to be requiring that people get certifications for their particular purchases, or is it really just about the product that they're buying and there's a certification associated with that that verifies the recycled content?
Good question, Patrick. And the regulatory text doesn't necessarily speak to specifically whether, whether it's a certification, tailored to a jurisdiction that something like Office Depot might supply, or whether they'll have kind of certifications for each product available. So it doesn't speak to that, but the requirements are that the certification at a minimum has that that the product is eligible to be labeled with that unqualified recyclable label. And it also needs to include that post-consumer content percentage as well in certification, unless the website or catalog or invoice of that product can show the post-consumer content. So there's I would encourage to take a look at that, but it doesn't specify necessarily how vendors need to specifically provide this documentation or what it'll exactly look like, but it does just note what it needs to contain.
Okay, and I just had a quick follow-up on the gas generated from anaerobic digestion facilities. In terms of being apportioning the portion that is generated from food waste that might go through the facility, I assume that's done like on a per, input basis, or you could sort of segregate, identify how much you're putting through versus how much wastewater maybe is coming from the plant generally to make that calculation. I assume that's how you would maybe get that amount through the system.
Good question, Patrick. So the regulation does speak to it a little bit more, but the requirement is that only the portion of gas that is attributed from the production of diverted organic waste, so excluding POTW, incoming sewage, only that portion can count towards a jurisdiction's target, and it is using the conversion factors outlined in the regulation. So if a POTW, they would need to be keeping record of how much incoming diverted organic waste they're receiving, and using the conversion factors of converting organic waste tons to how much electricity, gas for heating, and transportation fuel can be produced from that organic waste. You would use those conversion factors to then kind of back calculate then how much of the target can be met through that.
Totally, and it's standardized. We included those conversion factors in regulation to have a standard set of assumptions for each product. So it should be. We did it for a couple of reasons, so that we have a kind of a level playing field and reducing burden on jurisdictions and businesses that might otherwise have to figure out how much of the gas is actually from this material in our system. So as a result, it's pretty straightforward. POTW takes in 100 tons of eligible organic waste. They multiply it by the conversion factor that's in regs that's relevant to the energy product they're using, and that's the total amount of energy product that they could attribute to a jurisdiction by way of contractor agreement.
Great, thank you.
Our next question is from Steve. Steve, you are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself to ask your question, and please state your affiliation.
Great, thank you. Steve Y again with the County of San Diego. Just a question on procurement credit for RNG, knowing that multiple cities here in San Diego have franchise agreements with the same hauler. If they're able to use RNG, how would the cities split out that procurement for RNG? Would it be 100% to each city, or is it divided by the number of cities, or just curious about that?
Great question, Steve. So the regulations outline that a jurisdiction can meet their target either through direct procurement, which is the city or county directly procuring and using that product themselves, or they can meet it through a direct service provider. So it sounds like the example you have is, regarding whether these haulers could be a direct service provider. So the requirement for those entities' procurement of eligible products to count for the city or county's target, the city or county would need to have a written contract or agreement with that direct service provider. So, for example, these franchised haulers, they would need to have a contract that outlines and describes that the hauler would be procuring and using these products on behalf of the city. And so even if that hauler is servicing, multiple jurisdictions and is, picking up organic waste and is maybe using fuel from the organic waste made from multiple jurisdictions, it would just be required in that direct service provider contract who is eligible to claim that use.
Yeah, and in short, we're not prescriptive on how that apportionment happens. It's going to be up to the jurisdiction and the jurisdictions and the hauler that services the multiple jurisdictions to come up with something that's mutually beneficial. And so, again, that's the direct service provider language in our regulations that specifies what's needed there.
Great, appreciate it, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so our next question is coming from Jennifer Anderson. Jennifer, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and please state your affiliation when you ask your question.
Hi, thank you. It's funny, I think my question was actually just answered with the previous gentleman's question about RNG and use of the captured gas in the trash trucks that are utilized in the city of Dana Point. I apologize, I'm with the city of Dana Point, for our service provider. I'm assuming, Michelle, that contract, that criteria would be met with the franchise agreements that we have with our hauler. Is that not correct?
So it certainly could be met through a franchise agreement, but the agreement would need to specify that the jurisdiction is giving the direct service provider to say that they will be using this fuel in order to count towards the city or county's procurement target for the purposes of SB 1383. So it certainly could be met through a franchised agreement. We don't outline what type of agreement, or type of written contract that it needs to be met through. So it certainly could be through a franchise.
And it could it also be through something as simple as an administrative memo?
Maybe, Alan, do you have any thoughts on that? This is a little bit out of our area.
Okay.
I think that we're not overly prescriptive on what form that might take.
Okay.
In regs.
Yeah, I apologize. I got the back end of it. I didn't hear the full contents of it. If the question, if you want to restate the question regarding the memo.
Yeah, well, in our existing franchise agreement, Alan, we have built into that document the city's use of the mulch that's created from the anaerobic digester facility. And the city gets that back for our direct use in our city parks, landscape medians, things like that. However, we did not address the use of the gas that's captured from the anaerobic digester utilized in the trash trucks that are used in Dana Point. So my question was, without having to revise the franchise agreement or amend the franchise agreement again, can this understanding be completed with just a simple memo to file between the city and our hauler for use of this captured natural gas?
Yeah, and that's the requirements are pretty simple in regs, and it's 18993.1 E2. It's literally written contract or agreement. So I'm not sure if CalRecycle should provides a little bit more clarity on what contract agreement might include, or whether that's something that jurisdictions will have to work through their legal departments on interpreting.
Okay.
Not sure how we've handled that in the past.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, no, thank you for your time. I appreciate you addressing the question. Thank you.
And one more thing, Jennifer, that I think is maybe worth noting. We are aware that a lot of collection vehicles might be using a variety of different types of CNG and renewable fuels, but we do ensure to take a look to the regulatory text and ensure that you did note that it sounded like it would be renewable gas from an anaerobic digestion facility, but I do encourage you to take a look at that and make sure all those requirements are met to ensure your fuel will count.
Okay, thank you very much.
Our next question is from Angelic Davis. I will go ahead and unmute you. Please ask your question and state your affiliation. I will go ahead and read her question. It is, will CalRecycle accept the green usage reports rather than actual receipts from the jurisdiction's office supply company?
Good question, Angelic. And that might be something I might need a little bit more clarification myself on your question, so it might be worth taking offline what is included in your green usage reports. So maybe that's something we can follow up with you on. Do you have anything to add, Scott?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what green usage reports include, but if they include everything that's required by regs, then it's it's probable that that would suffice, but it really depends on what's included and whether it meets the actual requirements and record keeping outlined in our regulations.
You would just need to make up an hour and 45 minutes amongst the other days. So let's say Monday.
Looks like we are hearing some other chatter in the background here. If you want to move on to the next question.
Thanks, Scott. Will do. Okay, so I just want to go back to one question that was answered, just to make sure everyone can hear the answer. So Sharon asked, will procurement reporting be included in the AB 939 EAR or in a separate 1383 annual report? The answer from Ashley is we will be modifying the EAR for 1383. So the next question we're going to go to is Laurie Robinson. And yes, go ahead.
Really quickly. So Sharon, just so you know, we are going to modify the EAR, but obviously that won't come out till later on. But once we modify it, we will be doing a statewide webinar on, the changes to the electronic inter-report and, how to start reporting the 1383 stuff and going through the tabs with you. So there will be a training on that as well. So you guys aren't just left with a revised EAR that you guys have to figure out. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Ashley. So our next question is from Laura Robinson, and she does not have a mic. So her question is, with regard to Colleen's mention that many cities have so many purchasers, will CalRecycle consider offering a video training we can make available for all of these purchasers?
So, we are developing a lot of content for our webpage and walkthroughs and providing webinars statewide, et cetera. And so if there are specific things that might be well suited to a specific training on a specific issue within regs, we could consider that. But, if you're interested in reaching out and discussing that further, please shoot us an email.
All right, thanks, Scott. So our next question is from Shahid. Shahid, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question, and please remember to state your affiliation.
This is Shahid Abbas with City of South Pasadena. My question is, we use a lot of material, recycled material for our road maintenance. I hope that's a qualified material from our diversion and our target estimates. Can you hear me?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Thanks for the question. The eligible products are limited in regs to the 5 that are outlined. That's the eligible compost, mulch, and various energy products. And so if it's one of those and it's from an eligible source and meets the regulatory requirements, then yes. If there are additional materials besides that in products that you utilize, then those aren't eligible for this particular portion of the regulations. But there are just virtually unlimited potential, very viable and important ways of utilizing all the different wastes that we currently landfill. And procurement only addresses a handful of these through our, procurement mechanism.
So what I am asking is, because once I overlay mill and resurface, if I don't recycle it, it's going to a landfill. So the one way of using that and that's a very injurious, all that chemical, that material, I don't know how to dispose it, and it's very difficult to dispose that. So if I recycle all that material and reuse it, that's number 1. And number 2, if I'm overlaying a new payment, we have what we call flexible, payment materials which we made out of recycled tires. So we use that on our streets. If I don't use that, those tires goes to the landfill. So those are not eligible, right?
Totally understand. 1380, that's outside of the scope of 1383. 1383 is specific to organics and reducing short-lived climate pollutants from landfilling. So again, we have entire parts of CalRecycle that are dedicated to utilizing, tire-derived aggregate and figuring out other ways of recycling materials and providing incentives for that, or helping outline possibilities for diversion. So if you have some specific concerns or requests or need assistance to that end, please reach out to our LAMD staff, and I think we can probably provide a fair amount of assistance there.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next question is coming from Annika. Annika, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question, and please state your affiliation.
Hi, yes, thank you. This is Annika Anderson from the City of Oceanside. I actually have a couple questions, but the first one I wanted to ask was about penalties. What penalties will be imposed on jurisdictions if they can complete some but not necessarily all of the regulations required? For example, if a jurisdiction monitors and reports on purchasing, but they can't necessarily collect all of the receipts, will they be penalized? And then will these penalties be backdated to the beginning of the regulation, January 1st, 2022, and will they be imposed per day?
Hi, Annika, I can answer the first one. So please see section 18997.3 regarding the department penalty amounts. We go into like what moderate, major, minor penalties are. And in regards to your backdated question, I believe Colleen Foster had that same question to me in an earlier email this week. So I am working with our internal legal group to talk about the process for that. So we will get back to you on that one.
Great, thank you. Am I able to ask my other question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So my other question is specifically about biomass conversion technologies, because in the regulation it doesn't define or doesn't include non-combustion thermal conversion of municipal sewage, sludge, or biosolids as an acceptable technology. And in order to use that technology, which is not considered incineration, CalRecycle requires that has to go through a case-by-case process of significant review, which just disincentivizes this technology from being used, even though it is widely accepted throughout the Northeast of the U.S.
Thanks for the question. The limited products that are outlined and required by the procurement portion of 1383 they're limited to what's in regs currently, and that includes electricity from biomass conversion. That is a technology neutral definition, as long as it meets I think it's Public Resources Code 40106 definition of feedstocks that are included in that statutory definition of biomass. And so in as much as a facility is taking those feedstocks and meeting the biomass conversion statutory definition, it could count towards electricity in procurement. But to your point on specifically sludge and biosolids conversion, there's a lot of very important solutions and technologies and pathways to recycling various products from our landfills, not just organics, as outlined by 1383. And these procurement regs only address, again, just the limited products already outlined currently. So that was developed through extensive stakeholder outreach, working with Air Resources Board and other agencies, I guess currently it is what it is, and it is limited to what's currently in the regulatory language. And I can't speak to the siting of these facilities or technologies at POTWs and how what process they have to go through from the permitting standpoint, and that's outside of the scope of our procurement regulation.
Our next question is from Kathy. Oops, sorry.
No, you're good. I was just thanking him.
Okay. The next question is from Kathy. Go. You are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself to ask your question, and please state your affiliation.
We have a business in Carson, California, and it's in the Los Angeles County, and we do a lot of composting and selling of the compost to end users. So is our jurisdiction our city, or is our jurisdiction the county?
Good question, Kathy. And I think there's a few layers to your question. So jurisdictions, it is the city, county, or what we call city and county, which would be the case of San Francisco, and the population of the jurisdiction. It's noted in the regulations that it is using the most recent annual data reported by the California Department of Finance. So on their website, and in our Q&A, we do have a link as well to where on their website you can find that population data. But it outlines the population estimates for cities and counties in California. So it'll be the jurisdiction's procurement target will be based off of that population data. Regarding a business in Carson, so it is the city or county who is required to undertake that procurement, unless they do have that direct service provider relationship. And Scott, do you have maybe more to add on to that? There's a few layers.
Yeah. So you note that you are located in Downey. I'm not sure off the top of my head whether Downey falls within the county jurisdiction or the city jurisdiction. It kind of depends on the arrangements that the county and cities have made with CalRecycle, and maybe somebody on LAMD staff can speak to that. But as a business located in the city, you don't necessarily have to work with that city on supplying a product. You could work with virtually anybody in the state that has demand for the product you're producing. And so again, being located, a jurisdiction can source eligible materials from anywhere in the state, so long as the requirements are met regarding, diversion from California landfills, from California facilities, et cetera.
I guess my question is, when is it the city's to the city's benefit when that city is located within a county that also has to meet a target? Like, which are you counting the capita twice? Oh,
no, yeah. So in the way that the jurisdiction as defined in regs, so this the way it's a little bit weird, but the cities within a county, the cities have have procurement targets. The county and unincorporated county and any population that's not included in a jurisdiction that's a city the county has to account for the rest. Does that make sense?
Okay, so
It's
yeah,
not double counting. It's
right. If that's exactly my question. So basically start first with the city that you're located in order to help them comply with the purchase requirements before you would go to the county and then expect that because the county purchased 100,000 tons, that the city within it got some credit. Like how do you? That's
entirely a business decision up to you guys on how you want to approach who you work with first, or who you think your best market might be. So again, regulations don't specify that you have to work with any one entity in this case.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right, so our last question for the procurement Q&A session is coming from Colleen Foster. Colleen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question. Okay, I will ask Colleen's question. Her question is, the question on green certification from office supply vendor is interesting. If we provide this as documentation, could we avoid having to collect and provide receipts to CalRecycle?
Yeah, I don't think we can answer that at this point. I'm not sure exactly what green certifications include. So I'd recommend that you work with your legal counsel on, identifying what that includes and whether it meets the record keeping requirements as in our regulations. If you have any specific questions on that, again, feel free to reach out to CalRecycle as well. It really depends on what is included and what the nature of that the green certification is.
All right, thank you so much, Scott. And thank you, Scott, Michelle, Kristen, for your great presentation. So that will end our Q&A session for procurement. And with that, we will jump right into our session on collections. So I'm going to start off with a high-level overview of the collection requirements for you all today. So jurisdictions are required to provide an organic waste collection service to all residents and businesses. This is what we refer to as automatically providing service or universal service. The resident or business is automatically provided the service rather than having to subscribe, and the resident or business must participate in that service unless they have been granted a waiver by the jurisdiction. Jurisdictions can comply with the regulations by providing a 3+, 3, 2, or single unsegregated container collection service. They can also use a combination of services. A 3-container service requires a jurisdiction to provide each generator with a green, blue, and gray container. The green container is for the collection of organic waste. Blue is for the collection of non-organic recyclables, but may include paper products, wood, and dry lumber, and textiles. And the gray container is for all other non-organic waste. A jurisdiction may provide additional containers or split containers for further source separation. A jurisdiction may allow use of plastic bags or compostable bags to collect food waste in the green container if the facilities the jurisdiction uses to recover the organic waste provides written notice to the jurisdiction that it can process or remove the plastic or compostable bags. In a 2-container collection service, a jurisdiction may either provide a green and a gray container or a gray and a blue container. Under a gray and green container service, the green container is limited to organic waste only, and the gray container allows for the commingling of all other collected waste. Under a blue and gray container service, the blue container is limited to traditional recyclables and may include paper products, wood and dry lumber, and textiles. The gray container is for all other collected waste. In both scenarios, the contents of the gray container must be sent to a high diversion organic waste processing facility. In an unsegregated single container collection service, a jurisdiction may provide a gray container that allows for the commingling of all waste. The contents of the gray container must be transported to a high diversion organic waste processing facility. CalRecycle will be using RDRS data to identify these facilities, and this information will be provided to jurisdictions. If a high diversion organic waste processing facility has an organic content recovery rate less than the 50% required by 2022 or 75% required by 2025 for 2 consecutive quarterly reporting periods or 3 quarterly reporting periods within 3 years, then the facility will no longer qualify as a high diversion organic waste processing facility. If a jurisdiction is in violation due to its high diversion facility being out of compliance, then the jurisdiction will be subject to the enforcement process. In this scenario, the jurisdiction must commit to one of 3 options: bringing the facility into compliance, using a different high diversion facility, or must implement a 3-container collection service. In a 3 and 2 container collection service, jurisdictions are required to monitor containers for contaminants. Contamination monitoring must be done for residential and commercial routes. A jurisdiction can monitor contamination by conducting route reviews or waste evaluations. Jurisdictions that choose to conduct route reviews must review all hauler routes annually. Containers may be randomly selected along a hauler route, and cameras can be used to remotely monitor containers. Upon finding contaminants, the jurisdiction must notify the generator of the violation. Note that the regulations do not require a jurisdiction to impose administrative civil penalties on generators who are in violation of the container contaminants requirements. However, the regulations do allow jurisdictions to impose contamination processing fees or penalties for contamination. Waste evaluations are a facility-based container contamination compliance method. This is the alternative to conducting route reviews. Evaluations must be done at least twice per year and must occur in 2 distinct seasons. The evaluations must include samples of each container type, so all container colors, and the samples must be taken from different areas in the jurisdiction that are representative of the jurisdiction's waste stream. The regulations specify the minimum number of samples from all the hauler routes that must be included in the evaluation from each container type. If the sampled weight of container contaminants exceeds 25% of the measured sample for any container type, the jurisdiction must either notify generators on the sampled routes of the requirement to properly sort, or perform a targeted route review of containers on the sampled routes to determine the sources of contamination, and then notify those generators of their obligation to properly sort. Note that a jurisdiction that is implementing a performance-based source-separated collection service must conduct waste evaluations at least twice per year for the blue and green containers, and once per quarter for the gray container. The regulations standardize container colors. The color scheme is either the lid is the required color, or the body is the required color, and the lid is the required color or gray or black. A jurisdiction is not required to replace functional containers that do not comply with the color requirements prior to the end of the useful life of those containers or prior to January 1, 2036, whichever comes first. If a container has minor repairs and remains functional, it does not need to be replaced prior to 2036. In 2022, a jurisdiction must place a label on each new container or new lid provided to generators. A jurisdiction must either place labels on the body or lid of the container with language, graphic images, or both that indicate the primary acceptable and primary prohibited materials for that container, or the jurisdiction must provide imprinted text or graphic images on the container body or lid that indicate the primary acceptable and prohibited materials for that container. The labeling requirements apply to all containers, such as dumpsters, carts, debris bins, and roll-offs in the residential and commercial sectors. Organic waste generators must comply with local requirements by either subscribing to the organic waste collection service provided by the jurisdiction, or self-hauling organic waste in compliance with the regulations. Commercial businesses must provide containers for the collection of organic waste and non-organic recyclables in all areas where disposal containers are provided for customers except restrooms. Businesses must provide collection containers that conform either to the colors of the jurisdiction service or must provide the required labels. Businesses must prohibit employees from placing organic waste in the wrong container and must periodically inspect containers for contamination. Generators are allowed to manage organic waste on site or use community-scale composting activities. Commercial businesses, including multifamily dwellings, must provide or arrange for organic waste collection services for employees, contractors, tenants, and customers. This includes supplying and allowing access to an adequate number, size, and location of containers with the required labels or colors. Businesses must annually provide information to employees, contractors, tenants, and customers about organic waste recovery requirements and properly sorting material, and must provide information to new tenants before or within 14 days upon occupation of the premises. Businesses must provide access to their properties during inspections by the jurisdiction. The regulations allow jurisdictions to grant waivers to generators from the collection requirements. However, jurisdictions do not have to allow any of these waivers, and it is jurisdictions, not haulers, that must administer these waivers. Waivers must be reviewed every 5 years by the jurisdiction. A jurisdiction may issue a de minimis waiver to a commercial business if the business is generating a de minimis amount of organic waste. De minimis amounts of waste are less than 20 gallons per week per applicable container for businesses that generate 2 cubic yards or more of total solid waste per week, and less than 10 gallons per week per applicable container for businesses that generate less than 2 cubic yards of total solid waste per week. A jurisdiction may issue a physical space waiver to a commercial business or property owner if the jurisdiction has evidence demonstrating that the premises lack adequate space for any of the organic waste container configurations. Finally, a jurisdiction may provide a collection frequency waiver, which allows a generator to subscribe to biweekly collection of its blue, gray, or both containers if the generator is using a service that requires the placement of all organic waste in the green container. A jurisdiction may issue the collection frequency waiver for the entire jurisdiction, specific areas of the jurisdiction, or an entire neighborhood. A jurisdiction may apply to CalRecycle for a waiver to waive some or all of the collection requirements. A jurisdiction may apply for a low population waiver if the jurisdiction disposed of less than 5,000 tons of solid waste in 2014 and the jurisdiction has a total population of less than 7,500 people. Census tracts located in an unincorporated county with a population density of less than 75 people per square mile also qualify for a low population waiver. Low population waivers must be reevaluated by CalRecycle every 5 years. CalRecycle must grant a rural exemption if a jurisdiction qualifies as a rural jurisdiction under AB 1826 and adopts a resolution finding that describes the purpose and need for the exemption. The duration of the rural exemption is December 31st, 2026. After that date, jurisdictions may apply for the low population waiver if they meet the criteria. CalRecycle may grant an elevation waiver to a jurisdiction if the entire jurisdiction is located at or above an elevation of 4,500 feet. Census tracts located in the unincorporated county that are located at or above 4,500 feet may also apply for an elevation waiver. The census tract may be partially located at the elevation. Elevation waivers exempt generators from the requirement to separate and recover food waste and food soiled paper. High elevation jurisdictions are not required to provide generators with containers, as generators may continue to use their customer or hauler provided containers that fit into their locked bear boxes. CalRecycle will be providing forms, guidance, and training in the May or June timeframe so that jurisdictions can submit waiver requests starting in September. The regulations establish conditions under which disaster and emergency circumstance waivers to temporarily dispose of organic waste may be granted by the jurisdiction. A jurisdiction is not required to separate or recover organic waste that is removed from homeless encampments and illegal disposal sites. These regulations also outline 3 requirements that must be met to allow a jurisdiction to dispose of quarantined organic waste. And finally, these regulations do not require generators, jurisdictions, or other entities to manage or recover organic waste that federal law explicitly requires to be landfilled, such as solid waste from international flights. Counties and each city, regional agency, and special district that provides solid waste collection services within the county must plan for adequate capacity for recycling organic waste. Each county will lead this effort. The county is responsible for establishing a collaborative approach to planning, collecting organic waste recycling capacity planning information from each jurisdiction, submitting the organic waste recycling capacity report to CalRecycle, identifying any jurisdiction, including itself, that does not have enough organic waste recycling capacity, and informing any jurisdiction that does not have enough capacity the timeline for submitting its implementation schedule to CalRecycle. Capacity planning efforts must include food, green waste, landscape and pruning waste, wood, paper products, digestate, and biosolids. And that concludes my presentation on the collection requirements. So with that, we will go into the Q&A session. Again, just a quick reminder to please use the instructions shown on the slide if you would like to ask a question. So with that, I will hand it over to Sarah Sanders for the first question.
Our first question is from Colleen. Colleen, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I'm actually trying to find the question in the list of questions. I apologize. So if you could read that, can you please? Thank you.
Your first question was, for route reviews, is there a minimum ratio of the number of containers that a jurisdiction must sample? For example, can we just check 1 container per route and be in minimal compliance?
It's not my goal to just do 1 container, but I am trying to get an understanding of what a route review needs to look like.
So I could take this on, or
So I could.
Okay, it doesn't matter. I could jump in, Julie, if you want to take a stab at it first, then I could jump in.
You can start, Alan.
Okay, so the regulations don't define a ratio or number of route reviews that a jurisdiction needs to do. The regulations do just state that the jurisdiction shall conduct a sufficient number of route reviews and inspections to determine the overall compliance.
And then just to jump in, Colleen, we do have a route review mini team that is working on best management practices for route reviews. So we will be getting that out sometime this summer. They will be doing interviews of best management practices with haulers, technology companies, jurisdictions. So be on the lookout for that as well.
Our next question is, sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead, Sarah, sorry.
Okay, next question is from Patrick. You can go ahead and unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself and ask your question and state your affiliation.
Thank you. This is Patrick Tallarico, the City of Palm Springs. I was wondering about the waiver for space limitations, and in a previous call, you guys had indicated that that was only a temporary waiver, but you did not mention that today. So did your interpretation change, or is it still meant to be a temporary waiver?
I can try and chime in, and then if Kara's here, she can also include her response. So for physical space waivers, CalRecycle feels that few of these waivers should be issued, because there are a variety of ways that the jurisdiction can work with the generator and the hauler to try and overcome those physical space waivers. So for example, a jurisdiction could work with its hauler to provide split containers rather than having to provide additional containers to take up that extra space. The jurisdiction can also work with various generators to figure out if they can provide, for example, in a multifamily complex that has limited enclosures, maybe providing certain containers in certain enclosures rather than every single enclosure. But they would have to make sure that the generators do have adequate bins to recycle their organic waste and make sure that that scenario is working. So hopefully that answers your question kind of, and I'll let Kara chime in.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And just to add, Patrick, so yes, our guidance has not changed. We didn't go into detail because we're limited on time today. You know, technically you could issue a physical space waiver for up to 5 years before it has to be re-verified. There are certain parameters which must be met to make sure that it's legitimate. But what we're after is with physical space that there should be an effort to address the physical space issue. However, with that said, some physical space issues may be able to be addressed sooner. For some, it may take longer. And so that's why the regulation is such that you have up to 5 years, and then it must be re-verified to determine if that needs to continue. So we do leave it up to the jurisdiction. The jurisdiction is also not required to issue such a waiver. So that is up to you. Does that answer your questions, Patrick?
Yeah, that helps a lot, especially with regard to the 5-year time frame, because I was wondering about that, because some people could do some of the changes that Julia was talking about pretty easily, but those aren't really the people that we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you're talking about enclosure, you know, the like. So again, you know, CalRecycle in our review, we're going to be looking at jurisdictions, issuance of waivers, is it reasonable, and the like. And there are going to be situations that are just going to take more time to deal with.
Thanks.
Our next question is from Colleen. Go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Really yet, but it was to clarify your answer in regards to the military question. So I couldn't really understand from your answer you guys provided in the chat box whether jurisdictions have any role or liability over military bases. It just wasn't clear.
Yeah, can someone read the response that was given? I'm not, so I can clarify.
So Kara, we talked about that federal facilities are technically non-local entities, so Article 5. However, this question was asked during the edible food portion, so they would not have to do the edible food part of 1383.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's more clarification needed, the role for jurisdictions or...
So Colleen, can you just give us a little bit more about what clarity you need? So with edible food, federal facilities are not subject to the edible food requirements at all. They're just completely out. So when it comes to organic waste requirements, again, education outreach, it is included in the organic waste capacity data. But when it comes to enforcement, CalRecycle would be conducting the enforcement as well as inspections of organic waste programs at federal facilities.
I guess to clarify, I mean, Oceanside right next door to us is a major military base. That's like another country. We have nothing to do with what they do. And I assume that SB 1383 doesn't change that. I don't, as a jurisdiction, I don't need to provide education to them. They can handle their own educational, all of the SB 13 requirements are on them in particular.
Sure. So if the military base were located within Oceanside's boundaries, you would be responsible for providing educational information to that federal facility. However, if it's located in an unincorporated county, it would be unincorporated county providing that education. But I think when it comes to a military base, collaboration is needed. So I mean, I think if that military base is doing its own education, informing its folks on what to do. It may be as simple as that type of collaboration.
And so then federal facilities, obviously, other type of federal facilities, then if they do fall within the boundaries of a jurisdiction, then that jurisdiction is responsible for the education outreach components of SB 1383.
That is correct.
Facilities.
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct. As well as including that, the related organic waste capacity data would be included in your numbers as well.
Okay, so our next question is coming from Ariana. Ariana, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi all, this is Ariana from the city of Ventura, and I wanted to ask what kind of verification will suffice as proof that jurisdictions have guaranteed organic waste recycling capacity? And I'm asking because recently we had locally a capacity planning meeting with our local land representative, and they had mentioned verification, but so yeah, I'm actually not sure. Maybe my question is better directed towards my representative, but wanted to see that's something on your radar.
Sure. So Ariana, I remember that presentation, and I think one of the questions that came up was, would verification suffice if the franchise agreement requires the hauler to secure available capacity? So that's an example. There are also some jurisdictions that have direct agreements with the processor for that. So that's another example of verified data. Both in the model franchise agreement, we address that piece as well. So it could be your franchise agreement, could be a contract that the jurisdiction has. So are there some scenarios that you're wondering about?
Just if it was written out in the agreement that they would send material to a specific facility, that is enough?
Yeah. Yes, okay. That would be enough. It could be also, if you had maybe a different type of documentation or official direction to your service provider that they have to take material to a facility, and that facility has agreed to take that material. So there's a lot of flexibility there. Okay. The key is you can't just assume that because a facility has capacity that you get to count it. There's got to be some nexus to show that your jurisdiction has that agreement. And that facility is going to take that material. And this could be either existing, new, or expanded capacity.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Olivia. Olivia, you are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself to ask your question and state your affiliation.
Hi there.
Hi.
Okay, I was just curious, going back to Colleen's question about the Air Force Base. So you said education and outreach. What about monitoring?
Sure. CalRecycle is going to conduct compliance evaluations of all the non-local entities and local education agencies as it relates to organic waste. So it would be CalRecycle that would be maybe visiting that military base that's located in your jurisdiction. We will be establishing the frequency of conducting those compliance evaluations, but it would be on CalRecycle to evaluate whether that, in this case, a military base, is complying with its organic waste requirements. Did that help answer your question?
It certainly did. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, and that is all the questions. Oh, we just got a question in. So Lisa, you are up. Lisa O'Brien, you can unmute yourself to ask your question. Okay, so I'll just state Lisa's comment just so everyone can hear it watching through the broadcast. So Lisa said, as an FYI, city employees most likely will not be allowed access onto secure federal buildings and facilities. So just a comment. Kara, I don't know if you want to respond to that at all.
Yeah, I mean, that, Lisa, thanks so much for that. I mean, again, the regulation is structured such that a jurisdiction doesn't have authority over federal facilities. And so that's why the relationship there that CalRecycle would be the one to conduct the compliance evaluation. So thank you for that comment, and you're spot on.
And that's all the questions we have right now in our go-to webinar platform, and we don't have any in the SLCP inbox right now. So just an FYI, we do have until noon if you do have any questions that come up regarding collections. So as maybe more questions come in, oh, we do have a question. So we're gonna hand it over to Sharon. So Sharon, you can unmute yourself to ask your question.
Unmute, Sharon. Okay, so in regards to the implementation record reporting for collection, when it's talking about it has to be within the implementation record within 60 days of when the record is created. Would that be from when, like for hauler collections, is that based off of when they're actually collecting the waste and taking it to a facility, or is it based on when they provide reporting to the jurisdiction? So I'm asking because we currently receive quarterly reports from our haulers. Would that still be allowed? And then within 60 days, that quarterly report has to be in the implementation record? Or is it now required that our haulers have to report to us monthly to be able to meet that 60-day deadline?
Alan, did you want to start? And then I can chime in.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Carrie, and then I'll chime in right after you if you have any.
Sure. So, you know, Sharon, the intention is for that record to be captured within that 60-day time frame. So from your scenario, it does sound like you would need that data sooner from the hauler rather than quarterly, because if you relied on them to submit it quarterly, you wouldn't be establishing that record within the 60-day time frame. So that would have to be done on a shorter time frame.
Yeah,
for your scenario.
Right. And then adding to that, specifically the regulations, it does say in regards to the 60 days, it's 60 days of the creation of the record or information. And that's specifically how it lays it out within the regulations. I don't know if that provides any more clarity or not.
So I think what we're looking at is the creation of the record at the point in time that the hauler goes through a scale on a particular day, or is it from they created a record of that quarterly report that's being provided to us? I think that's where we're not sure.
Yeah, so how I interpret it, and Carrie, you could correct me if you view it another way, but the creation of the record would be the time that it was created from the hauler when it's going through the scale. There's a different time period of when it goes to the quarterly report, and that would be in the rears. So I would interpret it just based off of what the regulations say is the actual creation of that record as it drives through the scale.
Okay, thank you.
Our next question is from Michael. Michael, you are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself and state your affiliation.
Yeah, I'm Mike Huber from the Navy, and we've put together a team of the military bases to try to just get our arms around planning these requirements. And I was asking if Kara or somebody would be willing to talk to our group, because I mean there are some kind of unique federal aspects to that, and I've been kind of looking up your contact info, but I think we should definitely have a discussion.
Yeah, Michael, we would love to make a presentation. If you don't mind just putting your email address in the question box, and we'll have a team member follow up with you. Thank you so much for facilitating that. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, because we're just trying to, and obviously, given that it's implemented locally, and we're just trying to figure out how the different jurisdictions are handling it. I mean, we have just a whole different set of situations throughout the state. And, and that's been part of the challenge on our side, because obviously the bases are very large. And, certainly, we definitely want to get that conversation started, because it takes years to fund for, if we have to make changes, within the base infrastructure.
All right, so our next question is coming from Caitlin. Caitlin, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Hi, this is Caitlin from the County of San Diego again. So with this talk of federal facilities, I just want to clarify. So will CalRecycle be inspecting and enforcing on all non-local entities within a jurisdiction? And so then the jurisdiction is just responsible for the education component, or will CalRecycle only be inspecting the federal facilities and the jurisdiction has to inspect the other non-local facilities or entities? Just a little clarification on that would be helpful.
Sure. So just to clarify, we're talking about organic waste, the organic waste requirements. And for that, CalRecycle will conduct the compliance evaluations of all non-local entities and local education agencies. Does that clarify, Caitlin?
Yes, I believe so. So the jurisdictions are only responsible for the education component of that.
Correct. When it comes to organic waste.
And then adding to that, the department is on the responsibility side for the enforcement of that, and there is a process that's identified in 18996.7, which goes through the enforcement process of both the federal facilities and local education agencies.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so our next question is coming from Steve. So one moment while I unmute you. Okay, Steve, you're unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question. Okay, I will ask Steve's question. How is per applicable container defined in regards to de minimis waivers?
Sure, what we're talking, oh, go ahead.
You can go ahead, Kara.
Sure, and then you can add. So what we're talking about in de minimis is in a 3-container system is the blue or the green container. So 2-container, obviously it depends on the system that you have. So we're talking about the blue or the green container.
All right, and then our next question is from Darlene. Darlene, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question. Okay, I will ask Darlene's question. Her question is there a deadline to file for the waivers? And the answer to that, and Kara can chime in, is no, there's no deadline to file for the waivers. You can file a waiver with us at any time for the low population waiver or any of the waivers.
Yeah, I mean, and just to add to that, Julia, we are going to be rolling out with training and process procedures in the April-May timeframe. We will begin some, as Julia mentioned, receiving waiver requests starting in September with an effective date of January 1, 2022. I think our perspective is that most jurisdictions want to have their waiver requests start January 1, 2022 rather than later, because then you are relieved of those obligations from certain parts of the regulation. So let us know if there's any other follow-up that you need, but those tools and training and resources will be coming in the April-May timeframe after we have the U.S. Census data available.
Our next question is from Colleen. Please unmute yourself to ask your question.
For the waiver program, could a city theoretically proactively file a waiver on behalf of certain businesses for physical space? So if a city was looking at a downtown district and it was very clear a certain district had severe limitations in regards to storage of these streams, could the city essentially waive those businesses?
Yeah, as long as the city meets the requirements that are laid out in the physical space waiver section, which is really documenting the aspect of what's needed for that physical space waiver. So certainly, a city, if it has that data and information, it could do so.
All right, so our next question on collections is coming from Sharon. Sharon, you can go ahead and unmute yourself to ask your question.
Okay, so sorry, Sharon with the County of San Bernardino. A lot of this is kind of like a clarification question, just to double check. So for areas that are eligible to receive the low population waiver, they would still be required to comply with 341 and 1826, correct? Sorry, did that make sense?
Yes, I'm gonna go ahead and let Kara chime in, and then I can maybe add to it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So we do have, I want to take a second because I want to go over, I think we have a frequently asked question that addresses this. Looking at, and we're talking about low population. So I just need to pop over and, do you want to go ahead, Julia, while I get the information?
I was doing the same thing on my side, pulling up some documents.
Maybe I can kind of go on what I'm trying to look for is understanding for those areas that will have to comply with 1383 collection requirements. 1383 is going to take precedence over 341 and 1826.
Yeah, it will, yes. So for example, if you as a jurisdiction had issued a waiver for 1826, maybe 1 cubic yard per week or a half cubic yard per week of organics, et cetera, the more stringent 1383 waiver does supersede that.
Okay, so then if we previously granted the exemption for 1826, they would then need to apply for a 1383 waiver if they had a similar scenario. It has to be a separate 1383 waiver that they have to apply for with us.
Yeah, you know, many jurisdictions that we're hearing from are actually already implementing the lower threshold. So for example, if you had a commercial business that met the requirements, the threshold requirements of 2 cubic yards per more per week of trash, recyclables, organics, and they had need of, say, a de minimis waiver, for example, we're hearing from jurisdictions, they're just starting to implement the lower 1383 threshold instead of, you know, let's give the business this year and then next year we'll implement. They're just doing it to reduce confusion. Did that help, Sharon?
Yes, I guess we can make it basically making 1826 exemptions more stringent than what they are currently in order to be able to capture the information going forward for 1383.
Yeah.
So then my other follow-up question, we are expecting there will be some areas in our county that will qualify for the low population waiver. So for those areas, they would still be subject to 341 and 1826, but not 1383. So the 1826 exemptions would still be valid for those areas.
Can I get back to you on that?
Yeah. Sure.
I'm not comfortable answering that one on the fly without looking up our info on it.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
And I'll add to that, Sharon, you know, I think that's a good question, and we'll get back to you on wrapping the totality of answering that question. But I did want to just add that AB 341, the MCR, does not have waivers as built in as part of those regulations or statute that's built into there. So I just wanted to throw that out there and clarify that. AB 1826 does, as well as 1383, but AB 341, there are no mentions of any waivers within those of any jurisdiction getting waived of those requirements.
Right, yeah, right now currently we only have an exemption program for 1826.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, and then, you know, same thing goes for rural exemptions, low pop, like a jurisdiction that has a rural exemption, they are still required to implement AB 341, and the businesses that, and this is probably going to answer your question, the businesses that meet the threshold of the 2 cubic yards per week of trash, recycling, organics are required to recycle pursuant to 341. So I hope that helps, but we will get you a
okay, thank you.
All right, thank you all so much. So our next question is going to come from Steve, and he has asked that we read his question out loud. So His question is regarding the 1383 organic waste reduction requirements. The only requirements he can find specifically for non-local entities in the text of, I assume, the regulations is in section 18986.1. Let's see, are these the only requirements for non-local entities? Not mentioned are edible food, education and outreach, procurement, and compliance monitoring. So are these other aspects of the 1383 requirements only applicable to jurisdictions and or private businesses?
That was a lot to tease apart. So Julia, let's tag team a little bit on this one. So clearly for organic waste recycling, in Article 5, non-local entities have specified requirements that also tie back to Article 3. Non-local entities do not have procurement requirements, for example. When it comes to the edible food, commercial edible food generator requirements, it will depend on if a non-local entity meets one of the thresholds of the commercial edible food tier 1 or tier 2. Our guidance that we have coming out in early March will provide a lot of clarification on how non-local entities relate to the, particularly the tier 2 commercial edible food generator requirements. With respect to the jurisdictions, with respect to organic waste, are not required to conduct compliance evaluations or enforcement on non-local entities. That will be CalRecycle's responsibility. Regarding edible food, it will depend on if a non-local entity falls under the tier 1 or tier 2 commercial edible food generator thresholds. If it does, then the jurisdiction would be conducting inspections of any tier 1 or tier 2 commercial edible food generator. Anything else?
I think the last thing we should cover is if jurisdictions have to do capacity planning and include those non-local entities in that planning.
Yes, both for organic waste capacity and edible food capacity. If those non-local entities fall under the tier 1 or tier 2 commercial edible food generators, then they would be included in the edible food capacity planning. The tools that we have coming out will help jurisdictions with one, identifying their tier 1 and tier 2 commercial edible food generators, and then the calculator tool that we'll be creating, you'll be able to plug in those non-local entities that fit the threshold. For organic waste capacity, yes, all generators are included in the disposal calculation, which is derived from our statewide waste characterization study. So you are estimating the amount of organic waste, total organic waste disposal that is being disposed in that particular jurisdiction.
And then Kara, quick plug, and Michelle Dewey, are you still on the line? I was hoping maybe you could chat, even though non-local entities do not have a procurement requirement, that they potentially could help the jurisdictions with theirs.
Hey, Ashley, yeah, I'm still on the line. And sorry, I don't think I heard the full question, but certainly regarding non-local entities helping you know, for the purposes of procurement for entities to be able to help out jurisdictions with those procurement requirements. Jurisdictions are certainly encouraged to work with those entities, and I encourage them to look to the direct service provider language in the regulations to see how that can maybe fit for to help out jurisdictions.
Perfect.
Does that
Thanks,
answer
Michelle.
your question? Oh, sure.
Our next question is from Allison. Allison, you are now unmuted. Please unmute yourself and ask your question. I will go ahead and ask her question for her. The edible food recovery requirements, are justifications not required to apply this for all non-local entities or just for federal facilities?
Ashley, is Team Edible still available, or did you want me to answer?
I don't think they're online anymore.
Okay. So federal facilities are absolutely not required to comply, regardless of whether they met a threshold. They're just out. When looking at whether or not a non-local entity except for a federal facility is eligible, this will be covered in our guidance that will be coming out in early March. There are some non-local entities that are not state agencies that will fit the Tier 2 commercial edible food generator thresholds or category types, for example. So I think you'll find in the guidance that we have coming out in March, this will be pretty clear, I think, from my perspective. We also in that guidance specify that federal facilities are not a Tier 1 or Tier 2 commercial edible food generator. So I hope that's helpful, Allison. When the guidance comes out, if there are any follow-up questions you have, please feel free to send a note to the SLCP inbox. And we have a team that's specializing in identification of Tier 1 and Tier 2 commercial edible food generators, and they'll be available to provide any necessary technical assistance. Thanks.
Thank you, Kara. So Michael, I see you have kind of a comment and a question. So if you want to unmute yourself to speak, please go ahead.
Okay, it's Mike here. Basically, I think that Kara, I picked up your phone number, but we should talk after this and how to reach out specifically to the military as a federal facility. I don't know if it really needs to be aired in general contact, but I do think we do have a team together that is a compliance coordination group amongst all the bases in the state, and we are trying to get our arms around and be good neighbors. But there are obviously some unique circumstances. I think it'd be worthwhile to discuss. I have a March 24th call with that group scheduled. I think would be a good time.
Okay, great. Well, Julia, how about do you mind following up with Michael? We'll see what we can make work for that. If we need to, we'll adjust. But Michael, we'll be in touch. Thank you again. I agree. I think that would be a great opportunity. Also would help us to understand kind of unique situations and how to help DoD through that. Thank you.
Then I think to just the second part of Michael's question about will this be recorded? So we are recording this. It will be on our website. Once we make everything ADA compliant, we need to provide a transcript for this. So please sign up for a listserv. If you don't have it, I could provide it to you via email, or you could email the SLCP inbox. But that is where our listserv is where we'll announce when we release all of our tools and our webinars, etc. And then Julia, really quickly, there is a question in the SLCP inbox from Marty Solomon. Marty, I think you're on the line, but Marty represents Chula Vista, and they want to know if the CalRecycle representative will contact them because they have several questions on route collection requirements discussed in Article 3. So Marty, I will pass on your contact information to Kara and her team. Someone will contact you to provide some responses to you and maybe even offer some Article 3 presentations. We have a great one that Kara and Julia present on. It's about 3 hours long, but it's an in-depth review on Article 3. But awesome feedback from everyone that's gotten it so far. So for anyone who is in Marty's situation, if you want your own personalized presentation on any of our topics, please let us know and we will accommodate you guys as well. So thanks, Julia, for letting me cut in.
No problem. And the last question that I see is the PowerPoint used for this presentation available today? And so just to kind of reiterate what Ashley just said, the PowerPoint presentation, the recording, the transcript, once they're all ADA compliant, we will put them on the website. And we're going to try and do that sooner rather than later because people have been asking for that. So once it's posted on the website, there will be a listserv message that goes out to let you all know that it is available. And then it does look like we have a question from Colleen. So Colleen, you are self-muted, so you can unmute yourself to ask your question.
I don't think I had a question. I just want to join the Marty presentation. I have the same questions as her. Thank you.
And I see I was supposed to pass it over to Manuel, so my apologies on that. So Manuel, you can unmute yourself to ask your question.
He says he doesn't have a mic.
Ah, got it. Okay. So Manuel's question is, in the case of areas with multiple high density properties, would sharing organic waste collection services be compliant? And I can start with that, and Kara, you can chime in. So yes, commercial entities can share organic service just like they can with 341 and 1826 and still be compliant as long as all of the tenants have that service made available to them.
Our next question is from Steve. And his question is, it sounds like federal facilities are a unique category of non-local entities with some different sets of requirements. Will further guidance be issued in the coming months?
You know, we do have FAQs that address the only difference for federal facilities as it relates to a non-local entity is that they are specifically identified as not having to adhere to the edible food recovery requirements. So other than that, they are just like any other non-local entity. Steve, does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks. Thank you.
And Ashley, it looks like that's all the questions we have right now. So I will toss it over to you to kind of wrap it up and let people know what other resources are coming down the line.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thanks so much, Kara and Julia, for handling all those. So since we have 5 minutes left and no other specific questions on collections, I just wanted to let you guys know what tools are currently available right now for 1383 and what we have coming down the line. So as you guys know, we had Tracy Swanborn here from HF&H. They helped us develop the model tools. Those are currently online. Again, they include the franchise agreement, an enforcement ordinance, a procurement policy, and an edible food recovery agreement. So all 4 of those things are really applicable to what we just talked about today. We have an R3 local rate or local jurisdiction service rate study, which explains how you may have to raise your rates because of organic service needed in 1383. Please note that was pre-COVID, so things may have changed a little bit when we did this study, but that is published and online. We also have case studies that HF&H worked on, but we will continue to update those as we get more in. We have model signage and labels that come in different languages that include English, Spanish, Mandarin, Punjabi, Korean, and Russian. And that's for the different collection container systems. So one of the requirements of 1383. We also have an SB 1383 overview PowerPoint and video. We are working on updating the PowerPoint, mainly the talking points for that, and producing new videos to help really help with the requirements of 1383, really. And they're mini short videos, so those will be up as well. But we do have a Start Planning Now video too to share with folks. We have California's climate strategy and the waste sector goals. That's a nice, I think it's a 1 or 2 pager handout that you could give to folks. Another big thing is we have a guidance on CalRecycle's SB 1383 compliance process. So I know that came up quite a bit today in terms of penalties, but there is a whole compliance process before we even get to the penalty phase. So that's really important to read about in the discretion that CalRecycle has. As Kara alluded to multiple times today, we do have a robust FAQ section for the different topic areas, and then those will be continuously updated as needed. And we also have a revamped SB 1383 website, which include web pages by specific topic, so edible food, procurement, collections, etc., and by audience. So if you're a jurisdiction, a hauler, a non-local entity, those pages are either up right now or they're coming soon, and they'll be indicated on the web page. We just did a procurement calculator webinar a few weeks ago, so that will be posted as well. But we have the procurement calculator released to help you plan, obviously. And then we have most recently, and a big thank you to Colleen and Oceanside, and I think Palo Alto right now, but we have local implementation examples. So to actually see what your fellow colleagues are doing boots on the ground for 1383. So that will link you to their website to show what they're actually doing right now. Some things that are coming up, as I mentioned, we do have training videos to support the further understanding of the requirements. And in the next coming, I think in the next couple months, hopefully in April, we will have capacity planning tools. So there will be an organics waste calculator along with a whole bunch of different tools for edible food capacity planning. So it's going to be like a calculator-like tool, a survey, as Kara mentioned, the Tier 1 and Tier 2 generator ID best management practices, as well as other guidance. And then in summer, so summer 2021, we will have a model electronic implementation and record keeping tool. So Alan's team is heading up that. We will also have the department issue waiver forms, which Kara mentioned we will start accepting around September. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have route review best management practices, and hopefully that will include some videos, but we are a little bit delayed because of COVID and us not being able to get out in the field safely. And the last thing we have is we have the Article 2, New Technology Review Process and Application. Again, those things are slated for summer, fall to be released. For all of those things I just mentioned, we will be doing webinars. So like we did for Procurement Calculator, we'll release the tool or the guidance, give you guys some time to digest it, and then we'll have a webinar for Q&A. Last but not least, we do have some more regionals coming up. There are 3 more, so you could feel free to attend those if you would like. They are in March. We also had 2 funding webinars, public and private, and that's not just for 1383, that's for recycling manufacturers in general. Those will be posted online as well. We did have a solid waste statewide webinar, solid waste facility statewide webinar. That will be posted online as well. We plan on doing another one of those. We're just working on timing for that. And then next week, CalRecycle will be participating in the CRA Mini 1383 conference. So if you signed up for that, we will see you there as well. And the last thing, and the most, I think, important thing is Kara, myself, anyone on the 1383 team, we're always happy to present to you separately at your board meeting, at your council meetings. We're happy to customize presentations for you, and we could go through all the different types of presentations that we offer. And then if you have any other tools that I haven't listed, please let me know if there is something else that you would like to see, and we'd be happy to talk about developing something for you guys as well, because it's going to take a big team to be successful in implementing 1383, and we recognize that. So thank you guys all for your participation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and have a good one, and we'll see you next time. So thank you.